Friday, May 10th, 2019, will start. Roll call, please.
Mr. Trunzo,
Here.
Mr. Perry,
Here.
you, Mr.
Here.
Mr. Paul, okay.
Mr. Hubbard.
Yeah, Mr. Hubbard. Mr. Weber.
Here.
Ms. Gay.
Here.
Our chair
Here.
is here. So the only person not here is, well, two, Joyce and Mike Strange, and
yeah.
we're not sure yet.
Joyce, we know will not be here.
Okay.
And I don't know about Mike.
Okay,
And KCI is here.
okay.
And a commissioner is here. Mr. Byrne. You can come closer.
He's sitting in the back so he can escape.
You think you're safe back there. Okay, we have no minutes to approve. So moving on, correspondence, do we have anything other than, we have a bunch of correspondence that deals with the various issues that we'll pick up later in the meeting.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do is move to the comprehensive development plan. KCI has to clear out of here by 3 o'clock, is it?
Yes,
Okay.
2:59.
So we have to skip every other word that we speak, right?
Keep meeting after us. We just have to do it.
Oh,
We got a package last night as promised, or late yesterday afternoon, which I sent out. Hopefully, everybody spent all night reading it. Just a little bit of history on what the package was, because it looks a little different than maybe you expected it was going to look like. First of all, KCI did a great job of taking the stuff from last week's meeting, which was somewhat painful, and really putting it in good form. And thanks to Susan during the week, Susan, many of us have been thinking about it, but I think it was Susan that really sort of helped solve the problem that how to differentiate, because we were talking about who's going to take the survey and how to differentiate between people who are stakeholders in the city of Rehoboth versus somewhat different kind of stakeholder outside the city. And basically, Susan looked at a number of other towns that had gone through this process, and they ended up with separate surveys. So Susan went through and did a quick pass of sort of separating that out, communicated with Debbie, and you guys have done a super job of
Thank you.
we're real close, I think. So
So the visitor one is derivative of the larger question bank and just zeroes in on how they use the town rather than
Yep.
all the sort of quality of life issues. Plus, after seeing it, I actually think we may get a better response because it's shorter, you know, because people who aren't here may tire of 35 questions, but maybe they'll answer 11.
So what we want to do is with Debbie's help, go down through these lists that we studied all last night. I've actually looked at them. I think Susan has probably looked at them. Hopefully, maybe some of you have looked at them. They're really pretty close, I think. So let's see if we can get them in final form and then move on. And you want, Debbie, you want to start with the demographics one?
Great. I do want to give the credit to Shannon because we were scheduled for 2 hours as a follow-up in our budget, and she spent over 8 hours researching SurveyMonkey, formatting. We had several meetings on how to make it work, so she did a really, really good job. I want to give her credit on that, especially under the wire of getting stuff on Wednesday.
Thank you, Shannon.
So thank you very much.
Yay, Shannon.
I appreciate it as much as the commissioners.
Okay, so you want to
So-
walk us through this one?
Yeah, so can we go through demographics? And the reason I want to choose this one is I think it helps set the tone. If you would just go to the chart on page 2. So we have a lot to do, even though you're here today to hopefully.
Which chart?
The one that says who should take
Who
which
should take
survey.
which survey? Second
Oh,
paragraph.
okay.
So the reason that the questions to go through, I think, will be less cumbersome today, which will help you. But now we have to say who should take each survey. We have a lot of formatting and a lot of work to do after today. The questions are supposed to be the easiest part. We have a lot of work to do. If you are a property owner, skip to number 7. If you are, so there's a lot of formatting. So we thought one of the easiest ways were what categories, what's the intent of this exercise is what categories should each of these descriptors be, and what survey should they be taking? Because some people can take multiple surveys depending on what they have or what situation. One question we have that we want to pose to the commission is, how far down do you really need to drill down? Are you interested in property owners? So on each one of these, we could be missing categories. They can be broken down into about 10 more descriptors. But every time you break it down, it's what do you need the data for? Do you feel that's important? Is that information that can be derived someplace else through the census? Because it's only a snapshot of those that choose to take the survey. So we're not getting the entire city volume, it's who's choosing to take the survey. So I thought we'd just start with the first one to say, let's stick to maybe the topic that says residential property owner. So the categories we want to talk about are residential property owner. What kind do we have? So I probably should have numbered these, but the first one is a full-time resident, right? So that's one. The next one is part-time. We determine that to be half of the year, under 100 or 182 days per year. So we think that's called part-time. Then we have part-time resident, which is seasonal, and we didn't quantify seasonal because that changes in the eyes of the beholder. So we thought that's going to be hard to capture, a little more detailed. So that's number 3. And then this is where it gets broken down anymore. You're a residential property owner, you're a full-time resident, but you rent out part of your home. Then you're a part-time resident, but you rent out part of all of your home. Do you need to know those 2 categories? Because it drills down more. Is the first question really, I'm a resident of Rehoboth, I'm full-time, I'm part-time, or I'm seasonal? So when we look at that category, do you feel that those 3 can just stand on their own merits as far as residential versus going, do you rent out your home part-time? Do you rent out your home by room?
Just a little bit of feedback. We have had problems over the last few years in the residential areas of investment properties. We differentiate between people have come in and created investment properties, which technically is illegal, okay, because it's a business, but we've allowed it.
Well, through a renter license process, which is legal.
Yeah, and versus an owner who rents out, because historically for 100 years we've done that.
Right.
And the differential problem has been that the responsiveness to problems that occur, maybe with neighbors or what have you, is different between investment property owners and people who own the property but perhaps rent out.
So how is that perception quantified? Because we've met with the police department and the building code and the rental license. How is it quantified to make it, how is that quantified that that is actually a perception versus data-driven? That's what we were trying to get to, the quantify of
I
it.
think it would have to be how often, how much time do you spend in Rehoboth Beach?
Yeah,
Residents of the investment property owners probably spend no time in their houses.
yeah.
So the question is that making that statement with a perception versus data-driven. So I was trying to figure out if we have data to back something up that would back up the perception of it is investment properties that are one of the issues that we have, or rental properties one of the issues we have, because under that comes overcrowding, parking, there's all the subcategories. So the question was on the demographics one, do you want to know, first of all, do you live here? So that's the first 3. Then the second one is, you could almost put in there, do you rent out your property? You know, if that's what you want to, if you're a rental, whether it's investment property or business, but that's another category versus.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
This list I thought was meant to sort of get at making sure we're covering all the bases of who should take it, right? But on question number 2, you're asking, are you suggesting that based on the answers that we give today on who should take, that you would change the number 2 one? Because it's got everything covered there.
It's not just this, it's for, if you own your property, then you might not be subject to other questions. If you rent your property, you might be subject to a different survey. So it's how you, the categories would lay up the responses that you're, that you may be subject to. And once we know these, then we'd have to format accordingly. So my question is, the first one is, are you a residential property owner? And in our eyes, there was really 3 categories.
Yep.
So I just wanted to make sure we're in agreement. Then, you talk about investment or rental properties. Are you, if you're not if you're a property owner, are you full-time, or you're part-time, or you're seasonal? I guess the other one would be, are you a residential property owner that are absent?
Well, yeah,
There are people that,
yeah.
that fall into that category. Yeah,
So that means if you're absent, somebody else could be in your home, or it could be vacant.
that's correct. That's
Or
correct.
we're not even talking about, residential. So
Yeah.
is that third category, you own property, but you are not a full-time? Should we do residential property owner other? So you're not full-time, you're not part-time, you're not seasonal. So is the other option,
Residential property
you're not
owner
here at
other.
all?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for instance, I have a next door neighbor, quite honestly. It's a family, a woman and her sister, and there may be a brother involved, who have bought a house whose intention is to retire here in X number of years. They're still working, so they've made an investment. They own the property. They really don't use it themselves. They rent it out
They would
at the current time.
They would probably say that they're a part-time seasonal rental.
They probably would.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
In their eyes, they are. If they
Yeah, because
stay,
if
if
they
they
come-
stay there,
Yeah.
They
through
might
a
come a
season
couple
or
weeks.
two.
They might come a couple
Right.
weeks
But
a
that's
year.
fine. I mean, then they're part-time.
Yeah.
I will say this, at the meeting last week, I had mentioned this whole thing about the absentee investors and how do we get that. And I have to say, I think I've changed my mind a little bit on that. Partly because if somebody's truly absent, like they're never here, chances are they're not going to fill out the survey.
thank you. Okay. All right, so could we close to bed to say those first three, we agree, those are definitely categories in our demographics?
Yeah.
And then we need to get into, because it gets all into type of rental. I mean, if we want to capture, do you rent your property? That's the capture point. Do you rent your property? Do you rent it long-term? Do you rent it seasonal? Do you rent it year-round? So if you're not renting your property, you skip that question and go to the next one.
Yep.
So if we were to say, you rent your property, we can word this a little bit, but you rent your property, we have, just skip down a little bit, you would be, some of these are just really, really broken down, but these are ones we pulled from other places. You rent the same beach house that's the responders, but if you rent, do you rent seasonal, year-round? What would be a third category there? Weekends,
You need
short-term? We don't have to break it down if you don't
all
want.
short-term, even the weekly rentals are short-term.
Yeah.
So short-term would be anything less than a week, correct? Because we have a week-long, if you want that. And then you have seasonal, and then you have year-round. Or do you not want to break down? It's completely up to you. We usually just say, do you rent properties or not? Because you're not regulating rental properties by how long somebody can rent them in the city.
Well, we're not at the present time, but there certainly are communities along the eastern shore, well, along the Atlantic shore, which regulate how often someone can rent a piece of property.
Through regulations of licensing
That's correct.
and
That's-
operations. So if this is goals and objectives, and we know that one of the implementation is there should be a study on rental properties, what types, how often, because of the impact it has in the community. If that's what our end game is, really to say what the rental property have on the impact, then that's another project of out of our rental licenses, how many are short-term, how many are long-term, how many, so that's another project, but the implementation.
Understand.
The
item-
licenses are the same.
Right, but you can categorize them, so they're actually, in other jurisdictions, they're actually monitored through licensing to say short-term, long-term,
But ours aren't.
Airbnb, right? So,
Yeah.
but you're not gonna be able to do that operation.
Right, yeah. No, I get it.
So do we just wanna know if it's a rental or not, or do you wanna know what kind? Or do you care if it's a rental or not, during this?
No, I think we do care if it's a rental.
Yeah, we do.
we know
Yeah,
it's
we do care
rental.
if it's a rental.
Okay, and then do we wanna categorize that? Weekly, yearly,
Yeah,
seasonal?
what kind of rental? Unless we can get at the investment property owners, and Susan, I think you're right, they're not gonna answer the survey anyway.
Well, I'm just
Then
wondering,
does it
didn't
really
you say
matter?
that we were going to try to broadcast this to through the city's means that we'd be able to
Everybody.
get it to,
Yep.
so they could conceivably be solicited to
And they're
fill it
not gonna
out.
think of themselves an investment property, they're a property owner who rents.
Who rents?
Right, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So then if you want the property owner who rents, and we know if they live here or not, seasonal, and they rent, do we just want to know what kind of rent? Is it is it yearly? Is it weekly? Is it short-term? Or is
That
it
would,
just
ha-
short?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so we know seasonal is one, correct?
Yeah,
And then year-round?
there are some.
Yep.
There are some.
And then would you do short-term meaning under a week?
I think short-term by definition is a week.
Is a week, generally
so,
here. I mean,
yeah.
there are rentals for
I mean, you-
weekends, but that
Yeah,
is
Short-term, a
somewhat
week and
special.
under, we can maybe just give it 3 categories. Short-term is a
Yeah.
week and under
you're
a
right,
week.
that's fine, yeah, a week and under,
A week or under.
yeah, that's good.
Okay, so then we can get out of the rentals, the Airbnbs and everything else, because
right.
that's through licensing. So now you're a property owner. We have the 3 categories, property owner. We have 3 categories for do you rent your property? And then we get into, so I'm gonna take you down to probably the last 2 on page 2, which is, as a visitor, what type of visitor are you? We're trying to get in here.
Yes.
When you come to visit, where do you stay?
Right,
Do you
yeah,
re-
yeah.
And this was all the categories to choose from. We probably overdid it, but if I can walk you through, let's go to page 3, because the last 4, I thought I captured it. If you're a visitor and you have lodging in the city limits, is it weekly or seasonal? Is it a hotel, motel, or bed and breakfast? Do you stay with friends and family? Or is it a room rental or Airbnb? That can be captured smaller or wider, but those were the 4 we thought would capture all of the categories for visiting, lodging,
What
visitor
about
lodging.
day trippers?
Pardon me?
Day trippers who don't rent at all?
Well, you would skip this question because it's visitor lodging.
Okay.
Yep. So this is if you were to stay in Rehoboth, if you were to stay in the city limits of Rehoboth, which of the following lodging do you frequently use? Or look at the Likert scale.
I think there's overlap between Airbnb and the weekly or seasonal.
Yeah, we just didn't know if you wanted to, yep, that's fine. So we can take off the Airbnb and room rental and put weekly or seasonal?
Well, no, room rental is a thing, I get, maybe.
So is
but-
Airbnb is room rentals too.
No, but Airbnb also does full houses,
Yep,
is all I'm saying,
yeah.
so.
Just put rental room?
Maybe room rental, I mean,
Okay.
if we think that's a category, but I thought it was, so.
So we leave those 3 in there and wordsmith that. So now I'm a property owner, I rent, I'm a visitor with the lodging, and then we go to the detailed category of business owner. I'm not sure if we have to address this. A business owner who lives in the city. So now the category we were tasked with was how do we capture business owners? Non-rental business owners. So we have business owners who live in the city year-round. Well, you're already gonna check I'm a residential property owner year-round. We could ask the question, do you own a business or do you own business property, and break that down? So if you own a business, what categories of that would you want to know? You own a business in the city limits of Rehoboth. Or would you need to know this?
I personally don't think we need to know if a business owner lives in the city or doesn't live in the city, quite honestly. Their stake as a stakeholder is the business.
Right? So
Where
on
they
the-
live is perhaps almost immaterial.
So one of the things that we have on the business survey that might cover it is, how long have you been in operation? Are you currently leasing or renting? Do you own the building? So I think we're capturing the data that you might want in the business survey. So I say we take those categories off and we're truly to residential, rentals, and visitor lodging. So
Would you
The
still have
business
rental
survey.
tenant?
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
I was just gonna ask if you would still do rental tenant of a business property. In other words, a business owner, but not a property owner, somebody who rents their business, which, as most of them do, I gather.
So we would have the category of I'm not a residential property owner, but the only category you would have checked there is a rental tenant of a business.
I'm just asking if that should be one, because isn't that most of our businesses?
Which on the business, is this business currently leasing, renting
Yeah,
this
right,
occupation?
right.
Does this business currently own this location? So that's in the business survey, but not demographics. It's a straight up question.
Okay,
So if I owned a property labeled A, and I took out the business survey because I'm the property owner, so I have a business because I'm having the business, but I'm a tenant in that business, they should also fill out the business survey.
yeah.
So, but I think we have enough questions when we get to business survey on that to cover that population versus making it a general
Yeah,
demographic.
Okay, fine.
I'm thinking, I have a neighbor who is a long-term resident of the city. So he would be a resident. He happens to own multiple businesses in the city and has historically for, 40 or 50 years. I don't know if that, in and of itself is a category that we need to.
We would want them to fill out 2 surveys, the
Yeah,
business survey and the
right,
community survey.
right.
You're not going to capture everybody in demographics, so we want to say, out of these categories, then we'd analyze who fills out the community, who fills out the business. Some can fill out both. I mean, other than, you're either going to be a resident or a visitor. That's
What about employees? Are they visitors, or do we want employees to fill out the business survey?
So we have under business, we have employees to fill out the business survey. They could also fill out the visitor and the business as well. So we need to put the category on here as,
So we're going to remove business-related things from,
yeah, so we'd go from, actually, the last 5 on page 2 and the top 5 on page 2 would be taken out of demographics, and the questions are actually put into the business survey on that rental business, like Susan suggested.
So we are taking out the person who rents the same house versus a different one. I couldn't figure out what.
Yeah, so it
okay.
usually is, do they do the same thing every time they come to Rehoboth? Do you want to capture those or not? And that's questions you get from coastal communities usually.
okay?
It's just a big drill down. Okay, so we have employees that we want to offer on the visitor and on the community survey. So we'll take that then and fill out the categories that they should be applicable for when we do the formatting. And we play the analogy to say, can you fill out all 3? Could you fill out all 2? Could you fill out 1? To make sure they all fall in the right categories. So we actually do that in-house with some staff to say, test this out.
Okay,
But
is that it?
there is a big category missing from this list. And that is the people that live in Sussex County. I mean, Paul called them day trippers, but just people who use the city.
Visitors.
Well, they're not, well, they are visitors. Then, so, well, yes, that is the survey they should fill out. But in terms of the demographics, we're not getting at people who live in 19971.
No, you're getting outside city limits. So there, unless you wanted a category for the people specifically in the zip code, the confusion there would be, I'm in the zip code, but then I have to go back to I'm in the city limits as a resident, or am I a visitor?
No, I'm only saying, because here you have visitor only in lodging. So what do you do about?
Correct.
So what do you do about people that come to town often but don't stay overnight because they live outside the city?
Community survey.
But I just don't see them on here. Do you have them
No,
elsewhere?
no, that would be in that category in the header would be the community survey. So
Okay,
we would put
that's fine.
outside,
No, not in the community. They are in the visitor survey.
they can fill out the only people that can fill out the community survey are property owners. I guess that's the easiest way to
And
classify.
residents of the city.
Right, and residents. The people that fill out the visitors are the other categories, which is the visitors doing the lodging outside of the city limits. So whether you're Sussex, Seaford.
Right, outside. I just
Yep,
didn't see that
outside- yep,
listed here.
right,
Okay, all right, yeah.
Okay, and that is gonna be for visitor. So that helps us go to question number 2. We thought that exercise would be less painless.
But the visitor survey captures that, right, in terms of their status as a visitor, in terms of where they live and all that kind of stuff, that.
Yeah, so so now what we have to do is, once you do this, we have to go in here and format and say, did we capture everybody? There's a whole exercise that goes to the back end of this.
Yeah.
So once we plug in your decisions that you made on those charts, we then have to go in and say, is this the right category? Did we hit everybody? Like you said, can they fill out both, employees? And then you'll see in the final format, because the formatting really helps everybody understand so much more.
Right.
The reason we only do it one time is because when you format multiple times, you change every time by putting in one question, it changes the paradigm of the rest of the questions. So that's why we try to not do this. I said, just do it. But it helps you understand what we're getting towards. So we just want to make sure that we have on the first page of the demographics, that we have captured all of those that we originally said without calling it an investment property. That confuses people sometimes. We all know what the meaning is, but not everybody will check the box. And then how would you describe your residence? So this is going to be here's a good example. I am a resident in Rehoboth who owns property. I would go to question number 3 technically on that page. If I'm a rental, I do not go to question number 3, I actually skip it. So this is truly the property owners to say, how would you describe your residence? We have single family, multifamily, which is apartments and townhouses. And those can be broken out too, by the way. They can be multifamily apartment, multifamily townhouse to get the demographics if you want that. Townhouse for multifamily is usually 3 or more. And sometimes the duplexes, we just want to clarify that that'll be 2-family dwelling. like most old school people know what duplexes are. I'm gonna say my age and older. Some of the younger people are calling it twins. So we'll just put 2 units. Is there any other, because the condominium, like I'll give you an example, Henlopen Acres. People could check 2 boxes here to say I'm a condominium and I also am in an apartment complex in their eyes. So do you want to break down the condominiums? Because that really isn't a resident unit, it's a legal description
It's
of
just it's an ownership.
authority,
It's-
yeah.
It's an ownership.
So our thought was maybe take out condominium, and then I didn't know if you wanted senior assisted living, because I'm not sure about how much of that is here, or if there is any.
Not in the city.
Not
None? Okay, so then do we want to remove
housing either.
condominium and senior assisted living?
No, I would not
Condominiums
remove
are-
condominium. I would not remove that.
Well, it's describing the residence, so people could check 2 there unless we're very, like, I mean, literally, the only one I know is like Henlopen, but I'm sure there's other condominiums, but I can see people checking 2 there easily.
I would leave it in.
Okay. So you know that your data could be the same answer. So you try to
Yeah.
curtail that if possible.
So yeah, so you're saying there's overlap between multi-unit, family home, apartment, townhouse, and condominium.
So the condominium isn't a resident, it's a resident type for a legal ownership property, but it's not a land use resident type.
Right.
So our question was, we just want to make sure that when you get these results back, you're aware that some people will answer twice.
Yeah, why don't you have apartment and townhouse as separate items?
I
And,
said that 5 minutes ago.
oh, sorry.
Yep. If you want to separate them out, that's what we would recommend. And then it's up to you if you want condominium, affordable housing, senior assisted living. These are
Not
just the
affordable housing,
options.
not senior assisted.
Take out senior,
I think, I mean, we don't have that
I
here.
don't
Take
think
out
we have any yet.
Why don't you just add condominium to apartment, townhouse, condominium?
Could do that if you
Okay,
don't really
yep.
care of the breakdown.
Multi.
Yep, yeah, yeah, you could do that.
yep,
That's
okay.
another thing, okay.
That makes sense.
Remove condominium, add it to multifamily, and then affordable housing. So this is a tough one because that's in the eye of the beholder, what's affordable.
If it-
So is that that's more of a, not a unit type, again, a resident type. So we know single family is a resident type, a condo, apartment, townhouse, duplex, and then the other, if they feel they're in something else, like a guest
Would
court.
we care about garage apartment?
You mean as a separate category?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, just in terms of the thought that if we're revising that idea of a garage apartments.
Yeah, if you're going to split out apartment, townhouse,
She's not, she's grouping them.
well, or
Yeah, they
grouping
said
them.
group 'em. They'd be considered a multifamily,
Yeah, there are.
parentheses on a condo / garage apartments, unless you want them categorized.
I only single out garage apartments because they used to be legal
Right.
and they're not, I mean, they still exist, they're grandfathered, but
They're called ADUs.
I'm just
They're
wondering if you
accessory
want to
dwelling
sort of
units.
know about that, you know, I don't know.
I mean, there are a good
Yeah, a good
Oh, yeah.
number
there are a
of
good number of
Yep.
them
Yeah.
that still exist.
So their terminologies, would they know them as the terminology, which is accessory dwelling unit?
Yeah,
ADU?
yeah, yeah.
And then we can put parentheses garage apartments,
I'm
parentheses
just
garage
tossing it in there.
apartments.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
that you'd
Because
have to-
ADUs
you'd
is a
have to-
term you're gonna see in the comp plan. You're gonna see that term through state planning.
Yeah,
So we could put ADU question, or in parentheses, garage apartments, et cetera.
yeah. It might not be a garage, but
Yeah.
it'd be a separate building.
Building, yeah.
It's vernacular, I think.
Second structure apartment.
I mean, there are no technical affordable units in the city. I mean, from a sense, there's no units designated as affordable units.
And
No,
affordable is in,
but
There's no
the state,
subsidized
but the the state is going to sledgehammer us on affordable housing, so.
you can't justify that in a survey. So our recommendation is to remove affordable housing from here because this is unit types.
Right.
We're not talking about ranges of rentals. We're
Yeah.
not talking about ranges of how much the house is worth. This is residential types, and affordable housing isn't necessarily a structure type.
No, it could be any of them.
Correct. So we're recommending to take that one out. So we have it down to single family, duplex, ADU, garage apartment, second structures, however we kind of wordsmith that. Multiple unit family, apartment, townhouse, condo, et cetera. So that puts us down to 1 through 4 categories and other. In case something is, some people will call it mother-in-law quarters, we'll get some other ones, but they'll probably fall into one of the other categories. And then we didn't change anything on the demographics. I know this was the one that kind of was in the 4th hour of the last meeting, so it kind of dropped off. We had discussion, but we kind of lost our notes. I apologize, but I don't think there was a consensus on what is your current employment status, number 8. This got into wanting to remove potentially homemaker, middle grade school. There was a lot of discussion about this. So we just need to say, what is it that you want us to remove from here? What do you want to capture? So we know that your workforce housing could potentially be high school students or college university students. We had that discussion. But do you want to, these are all the categories. You don't have to capture all of them. You can say full-time, part-time, self-employed, unemployed, retired. You don't have to drill it down this far if you don't want to. But, you know, in our survey bank, you wanted all of them, so. It's kind of like unemployed and looking for work. Does that mean we're gonna, unable to work, unemployed, not looking for work?
I'm not sure that that's critical.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you're
maybe just-
probably full-time, part-time, I would assume self-employed, retired. Is there any outside of that that you think on this list?
Given that you said the students could be workforce, then maybe just a category that says student, don't have to
Yep.
categorize whether it's high school or college, but just
Just
student.
put student.
Okay.
So retired is not gonna be categorized, it'll say part-time, retired, full-time, retired, it's just retired. If you think you're retired, you're retired, earn it, you earned it.
Can I go back up to 3 for I'm just looking at the placement of it. Right after number 3, you say, if you do not own a home in Rehoboth Beach, please skip to question 7. Are we saying that everybody who fills out, including visitors, are going to tell us about their residence? Or isn't that just for people that own?
This was your survey bank that was supposed to be
Right.
redlined to us that never got redlined because we ran out of time.
Right.
So we left
So I'm
everything
asking.
in here, skipping the questions. We wouldn't even be able to really get into the meat of it until we get the format.
Okay.
So you'll see something similar to that. I just don't know if it'll be placed there. We just left it exactly the way you had it last time to not.
But it's the intent to have that only for the community survey, that question, not for visitors,
Correct. Because
Okay.
it's not,
and not for business, I assume, either. But-
yeah, they'll be skipping questions in all 3 surveys usually.
Okay, that's fine.
Could be potentially, I should say. Do we want, so you're part-time, full-time, self-employed, retired. So if you're not retired and you're not working, you're not employed. Do you want a not employed?
That's good, yeah.
I mean, I'm not retired. Like if you don't, if everybody's not retired, are they just not working? Is that a category? Or would you skip this question if you didn't have a category? So are you full-time, part-time? And this is usually for people that maybe have not chosen a career path that raised kids and are here and they're not working, they're not retired.
But like a not applicable.
Okay, or other?
Yeah, or other,
Okay.
you know, it's just,
And
Other might be, you might be 3 of these. Okay,
are
household
you
income.
going to group students just as a group?
We're just putting the word student.
Student.
Student,
We're
okay.
taking off grade, middle school, college, university.
Yeah, okay.
All right, the next one is income, household medium income, or your household income total.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on that? This was redundant, question 11 on page 2. This was a redundancy to say, here's the breakdown that they had, townhouse, row house, duplex, 4-bedroom. This was, at one time, somebody typed in the 1 to 3 bedroom and the 4+ bedroom. So once again, I think if we're talking about rental properties or inventory, through the licensing and operation, a lot of municipalities have now come to say, how many bedrooms for your business licensing? It's part of a requirement on the form,
We
so,
have that, I think.
We have that.
yeah. So then, we thought we'd just do away with number 11 if you thought we captured it in number 3.
Okay.
And then we didn't get to talk about the last ones. How many children in your home? Do you have children in schools? If you want this or not, that's completely up to your, we just didn't get to talk about that in the
Yeah,
last
that,
meeting.
I think we want to know that.
Okay,
This was a big point of contention when the school property was renewed. As it turns out, there are only, of the potential 700 students in the school, there's only 20, or 620, well, it could go up to 700. There's only 20 that live in Rehoboth. You know, and which is
It's just a data, but to make a decision from it is
Yeah.
usually you want schools within your community of some kind for several different reasons. Is there anything else on demographics? We thought this would be the hardest one.
Nope.
We're hoping that format helped. So this is gonna help us now take this information and be able to put it in the front of each one of these. So then you'll see that final format to say, oh, I just tried to fill this out and my neighbor's in this situation or my neighbor's in this situation. So we want you to test that out a little bit. We'll be testing that internally.
Okay.
Great.
What would you like to see now?
Business.
Huh?
That's the easy one.
Business?
Business survey. So we put the generalized wording, and I highlighted this in yellow to say this is an example. So when you get the final document, based on who we have filling out the survey, this is where we get a little more particular. This is where you said, people don't know where the city limits are. So we want the link to the map, or we want the image of the map, so people actually understand. So this is just a wordsmith of the document, and when we get the final, we'd actually like you to get in this and give us a comment on this.
Okay.
Because I know it'll flow better once we give you the final.
So then versus now.
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
So we just want to let you know, this is kind of we've tweaked it a little bit, but this is a standard format that we use and tweaked it for Rehoboth to say, here's what we want, here's why we want it, we just don't know the classifications until today. So we'd insert the demographics right, we'd have our due date, we'd have our map attached, our link to our map. Then we go into the business survey. So we made all the changes. If we go to number 9, are you in favor of mixed-use dwellings on the upper floors of buildings? We talked about this one, and one of our considerations was, are you in favor of more mixed-use developments in the commercial districts, mix of retail, office, and residential? So we're not saying, are you in favor of or are you against it? It's, are you in favor of more mixed use? And that was a good comment, I believe, from Rick or Jeff to say we already have it. So is everybody okay with that question, the way that we would do in the recommendation? We also have another option.
We have it by virtue of evolution. We don't have it by virtue of it being planned that way and zoned that way.
Correct, but if you're thinking about just the land use, you do have mixed use. So if you're walking down, you do have mixed use now, whether it's legal, non-conforming, right or wrong, you have it. So the opinion is, are you in favor of more mixed use development? And the scales can be different. It could be a subdivision. People are gonna think, yeah, let's do more of that on one. Well, we're gonna say, look at your map. So we wanted to get it to where we're not getting into what's legal and what's not legal, because the survey people will not know that. They won't know what's non-conforming, what's illegal, what's not illegal, or what is legal, I'm sorry.
And so the question would be more general. Are you in favor of mixed-use residential dwellings, i.e. residential uses mixed with commercial uses in commercial zones? Because it may not be on the above, it may be behind, it may be beside, it may be part over, part under.
Right, so we
don't
took-
know.
Our recommendation is in the red to the right, and we specifically said, are you in favor of more mixed-use developments in commercial districts? Because you guys actually wanted to say commercial district. We stuck away from the word zone. They don't know what the commercial zone is, but district in their eyes, it might be easier. Mixed retail, office, and residential, because we took that consideration to say, it's not up and down all the time. It could be side to side, it could be back to back.
Can be anyway.
So it would be in that red paragraph line, if that works better, in our comment, actually.
I think your comment
That was a good
captures it.
comment.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll use the box, the comment DP2 on the bottom. And then we took, the other recommendation we have is on number 20 on page 2 was, oh, by the way, we did add the 17, 18, and 19. We read your writing. It was great. You are not as bad as a doctor.
Close, though.
Yeah. Number 20, are you willing to support an architecture review master plan development? This is a recommendation in the pre-plus comments. It's operational, it's an implementation item. But as a business owner, does the business even know what this is? Because remember, we're having tenants and property owners fill out the business, right? So do they even know what it is? And there's nothing for them to say what they support. So one of the questions you can almost, I was kind of thinking about this in the drive, is to say, something about supporting the community character, because that's really what you have an architectural review committee, is to make sure you're preserving the community character, or the construction is being done so to do some kind of preservation. And our question is, do you want this question in there? If so, I feel you have to put a little bit more detail in it, because we're also not asking about any other operational questions. Do you feel the site plan review process is too long? Do you feel the business license process is too high? So we're not getting in operational questions, because those actually get done through due process when you do the regulations.
But, it's sort of interesting. On Sunday, I attended the Main Street Cottage Awards, for architectural significance and all. And there were a couple of people in attendance there who brought up the issue of architectural review and wondered whether or not, that was going to be something that would be covered in the CDP for the residential neighborhoods. Now, I know we've gone through that process in the past, and it made me realize that we had this proposed question in the business survey, but not in the residential survey.
It was in the residential survey. Did we take it
I
out?
didn't think so. Maybe I missed it.
I thought it was in here.
We have so many elements, but I don't think we.
Yeah, well, number 3, how important is it you, the city, establish architectural design standards for the following development types? And then it has commercial, residential, historic.
So I think if we're gonna pose that question, it's in the community survey, but if we're asking for the business survey to give their opinion, I think we have to do the same format. How important is it to you? Because this is a loaded question.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you support it and you don't know what it is?
Right, yeah.
And
I
it's
think they ought to be
operational.
consistent.
So what you would do, how you would quantify this is when you get the data back to be able to say, out of 500 people during our survey, we had 300 that say they support it. During our charrettes, we had 200 other people that say they support it. Therefore, we feel that there was a vocalized opinion that we need to put that in an implementation item. When it becomes an implementation item in the back, that's then to trigger the task after the comprehensive plan is given to go through the guidelines and the regulations and the process and the fees. So you wouldn't have the details of it in there, but you would have the goal and intent. And it usually gets to preservation. Usually architectural renderings are 100% character built or preservation. So do we think we should just word that the same as number 3?
If I can offer a comment. When the Architectural Review Committee worked back in the early 2000s, of which at least the 2 of us were on that, it was not ultimately for historical preservation. It was for streetscape. It was for...
Character preservation, not historic.
I wouldn't even say preservation. It was for, I mean, you might want to use that word, but and first of all, the recommendation at that time was there should be architectural review.
Right.
It was never acted upon.
So I realize the history of that, but we just want to know, do you want the question in there? And we
Yes.
think it should be wordsmithed differently. So can we use item number 3, and do you want their opinion on commercial, residential, and historic? And will people know what historic is? We can frame it the same as question 3 on the community survey, which is, how important is it to you, like Susan said, to you that the city of Rehoboth Beach establish an architectural design standards for the following development types: commercial, residential, historic, and then we did the extremely important, very important, moderately important, slightly. Should we frame that right into the business one?
Yes. It ought to be framed in both places. Because the recommendation of the Architectural Review Committee was that it ought to be done for the businesses, and it was not done for the businesses at that time.
Right, and that's operational, not comprehensive. So we want the goal of
Understand.
it to get, okay, perfect. All right, so then what we said was, wow, that's only 21 questions for the business community. So I had Shannon just look up a little bit, and this gets into a little bit more operation that might help some of the staff of the operations. So at the bottom of page 2, we had an additional couple questions for your consideration, if you want to or not. This was in your bank, and nobody addressed it, so we thought we'd bring some back. How satisfied are you doing business with the city of Rehoboth Beach? How satisfied are you with the present location of your business? Excuse me. How satisfied are you with the City of Rehoboth Beach website? So these are tools for business people to be able to use that they might not be aware of, or they might be
No,
happy
yeah, right
with, or
there.
they might be
Okay.
less happy. So these are some questions for your consideration. This is the first time you've seen them, but we do like, if you skip 1 through 4 actually. We do like 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think open-ended for the business might be a better option because I think you have such an array of businesses that the open-end will actually get us some results for some areas to focus on or to be able to see what data we get back.
Somebody mentioned the Main Street survey that was taken last fall.
Yes,
I think these are all in that.
they are.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So they had such a small population in that, we think you can derive from those same exact questions, which is 5 through 8 was with the Main Street survey. Very good.
Can I just ask, do we feel that people are familiar with the term Main Street referring to the organization? I didn't know if that's her official name or whatever.
It is a national, so it is National Main Street, and that's what, they have an affiliate and a different membership, and that's what every town can be a part of.
I'm just wondering if some people would be confused thinking.
What question are you on? I'm sorry.
Main Street, not the organization, or something, I don't know.
Are you on question 16, the one where it asks how important Main Street is to your business? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
it was-
Okay.
yeah,
So that's not the organization, that's actually, oh yeah, how important is Main Street? So we would put the Main Street, I guess we could put organization or affiliate organization, because they have actually a category.
Well, I think the official
And according
name
to the
here in town
paper
is the Rehoboth Beach Main Street.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
And then what we'll do is we'll put in parentheses their level, because if it's an affiliate, people would know that it's an organization, it's not Main Street. This is not Main Street.
According to the paper today, it was just certified, recertified.
Yes. Okay, we will elaborate on that one on 16. So our thought was take away 1 through 4, unless you want those in there.
4, I
Unless you
sort
want
of
them.
like 4. There's been a lot of discussion in the city about wayfinding signs. There's a lot of discussion about pedestrians versus, how people get into the districts.
And your trolley one, we had a lot of talk about accessibility the last meeting. So even though you have a trolley, what if there was a parking area with a localized Rehoboth trolley? So now we're taking away some of the weight of the transportation and enough to where maybe people can haul some of their stuff.
That subject has been discussed before.
Yep, so that's 4A was the intent of that one.
Yep,
So we can, is everybody good with 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8?
yep.
Any others on that? So that'll get us up to about, still under, it'll be get us up to about 25 questions, 26, which I think covers a pretty good array. And you'll see,
Back to number 4. It said, should there be the following to help improve business? And it says farmer's market, and there is a farmer's market. Or city festivals, multiple city festivals.
yeah, this is from
is
your, this is from your bank. We didn't get a response from it, so this was just from the survey bank. So we can take both of those off, or,
Well, no, it would just,
Or should it be more of?
I would think
there.
more,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
more, yeah.
more farmers markets, in addition to, or more, okay.
Yep.
Same thing with city festivals.
I guess they need another farmer's market, maybe other markets or something, dude.
Well, and it could be artisans market, maybe we
Yeah,
talk
so-
about that, how we talked about that, home goods services, maybe we could, yeah, local market, we can wordsmith that a little bit for you too. Because at farmers market, some people sell different things for different clientele. Okay,
I would reword A slightly, because it almost implies that the beach is remote from the town, which it is not. The beach is the town, or in the town. So I think the question is more of a,
a remote location or another location
well,
to the beach?
we already have that. It's more of a, rather than people driving around town and trying to find a parking, it's the idea like in Delray Beach, a circulating trolley, or a circulating bus that just basically picks up people, drops them off, wherever.
Yeah, I mean, like in
Throughout town?
DC, they call
Yeah.
them the circulators.
Yeah, we've got one in West Palm Beach.
Yeah, so
we
it's-
can-
it's
throughout
more-
town rather than beach and town, throughout town wording?
Yeah, I think that, and that question has been raised an awful lot because, especially with the aging population. A lot of the aging population would love if somebody would pick them up at their home and drop them downtown.
And
Well,
influence.
Jolly Trolley actually made a proposal to the
To
Board
do
of
that.
Commissioners to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's good, so if that's one of the options, if it comes out to be a large attraction, yes.
Yeah.
Do you contract it out, do you use existing services, what's the liability, yep. Okay, so we'll wordsmith that for throughout town. Anything else on business? We've got another hour.
No,
Okay.
no, that's,
Do you want to do visitor community? Visitor's easy.
visitors, you're doing all the easy ones.
You like to say the hardest part for last.
Well, we did the demographics first, that was, I thought, yeah. So this was great. What we did was, and thank you, Susan, for getting that to us Wednesday, because it was, we were saying, okay, she did the homework, she gave us the questions, Shannon formatted, and then it got us to think a little more on demographics, so that kind of helped with that chart. So once again, you'll be able to see the top part. It'll be standard with the exception of who should fill it out. The language will be kind of standard. So these were the questions that were selected. So one of the thoughts on this one is we're open to say, these are truly visitors coming to the town. So this is Shannon and I. So we think of it very easy on how we would have some input, because we're not into the stakeholder. So this would be something of what kind of questions would you value that we would answer to or are valued to us. These are the ones that were pulled by Susan. It might help, since the first time you've seen it, if you want to see this in final format after the community, after the business, or if you want to address it right now. So it's completely up to the commissioners if they have certain questions that we want to pull out of the community and put in there. I just know that once you see the final formats of all of them, you might say, I like the one that we did in the community, and I think the visitors should know about it. Because right now we have Susan's input, which is really good, by the way.
Yeah, I just pulled them out of the
Yeah.
master, so they could, yeah.
In case you feel that there's other questions, so that's, like I said, it's the first time you've seen this, and I think it's a great start. But we have no problem you reserving the right to say we want to see this in final format and look at all of them laid out.
Well, do we want to do community first in that case?
Oh, to see if
And-
it, yeah, to see if it's visitor.
To see if there's anything in community that then should be over here, okay. Well,
Yeah, so as we go through community, think visitor as well, and we'll make sure and put a note on that to take it over.
Okay.
All right. So the same spiel I just gave you on the first paragraph. So we didn't, and Shannon did a really good job on Likert. We keep wanting to say L-I-C-K, the Likert scale on the proper wording. So it was really good by Michael Strange to say that, and SurveyMonkey provided a lot of information. So we changed those categories so you could truly have, best, worst, no opinion, and scale it that way. So the changes that were all made, except for we have one on page 2, question number 2. And we need some help on this word. What amount would, and I know this isn't the proper term, what amount would you like to see the following land uses for the city of Rehoboth? And the Likert scale options were much more neutral, less than much less. So we're really not liking the question that prompted the Likert results. So we're looking to rewordsmith this instead of be more.
Amount doesn't, sort of leaves me cold.
So if we look at some other questions that might help that, we could do how satisfied, it could be a satisfied question, it could be a how important.
Yeah.
I think the only hesitation I have with that is then you're not knowing, do people want more?
We can do
I thought that's what we did want.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Right.
thinking.
Yeah.
So then if you're satisfied, you don't know if they want more of it or if they want less of it.
Right.
Just
because
ask,
they're
should there be
not
more or should there be
satisfied.
less?
Yeah.
Right,
Just the two instead of, this is a hard Likert scale question.
yeah.
So should we say?
I mean, yeah, keep the Likert scale, but just frame the question around, should there be more?
More like, are you satisfied? Do you want more?
But with Likert, it has to be 5.
That's what we're
choices,
saying.
right?
This might be one that you might not want to do the full 5 Likert. Like
Okay.
you said, it might be, do you want more or
More or
less
less,
of?
or the same.
Neutral, more or less. It might be a 3 scale. Would that be? You want more or less, or
That-
you're neutral?
More or less are the same, or
Okay.
whatever, yeah. By the way, I have one little niggling thing on this one, 2B, where you have bars and breweries. And elsewhere in the survey was the question about how people, use the town, and we talked about this last week, because we said, that even though we don't have bars per se, people come to town and go to a restaurant to go to its bar, so we want that in the, how they use. But this is a land use question. And bars and breweries are specifically prohibited as a land use in our code.
So these are, if we're
So-
doing, that's the question, if we're doing land uses, these aren't actually these are permitted uses, not land uses. Land uses are residential, commercial, industrial.
Okay.
So maybe we say the following uses.
Well, that's
because we're
fine. All
kinda
I'm
getting
saying is, I
familiar.
don't know that, I think that bars and breweries is elsewhere in the questionnaire as how people,
Oh,
is what
quality of
people
life.
do when they're here.
Quality of life.
But as a, right, but as a use question, I'm not sure we should have it because it's prohibited in the code right now. So it's
But
not a
that-
matter of more or less, it's not, they're not here as
People want
such.
them though, so it's not, it's kind of like, do you want them? People are viewing things as bars in their, this is a
Yeah.
personal question, so.
Right. It's a
it-
personal question when you ask how they use it later, how they visit later. This is, to me, this was, I don't know, I just didn't want to confuse people by asking about something that we actually don't have or don't allow. Unless the
But we're
intent is
asking
to
about
say.
mixed use, it's not allowed. We're asking about,
Uses.
we're asking about garage apartments, they're not allowed. We're asking about.
Okay.
So maybe
that's fine.
think of the thought is, if it's confusing people on, do you think this is a bar or a restaurant? Anybody that serves food.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody's usually, common sense is, that's a restaurant.
Right.
But if people think it's more of a bar and less of a
Sure.
restaurant.
Yeah, okay.
This one, we could probably wordsmith a little bit better in your final if we want, if we do the more, less, same type thing. Maybe we look at 3 and get a better word. We can spend some time on that question for you if that helps.
To answer your question, Susan, I think, isn't part of the reason for this to determine whether there are things that people want
Well, I
that aren't
guess so,
allowed?
but I mean, but in the case of this, it was more, and so more would be one. I mean, in other words, there aren't any now, so I just didn't get, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Maybe one of the categories should be need.
It it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're really, because if you're really zeroing in on what people are looking for and it's semantics, then.
Yeah, I think we can wordsmith that
Yeah,
question a
okay.
little bit
Yeah,
better.
that's fine.
I don't think they'll,
They won't.
They
pick
won't,
up
yeah.
on it, right.
Okay, so we go to, now this is where once again, I want to commend Shannon because this is where she actually changed, after doing the research, she actually changed the questions to say, we were kind of moving people into a statement versus asking a question. So if you go to number 5 on page 2 of the community survey, the one, we recommend removing the highlighted one and going with the first one. Should the city of Rehoboth Beach seek to promote mixed-use development, co-location of residential growth with commercial development and job opportunities to enable easier access to amenities and reduce strain on the city's transportation network? That's saying a lot in a sentence. We could go back to the original mixed-use question that we had before, which is, are you in favor of more mixed-use development in the commercial districts, mix of retail, office, residential uses together? And then we just have to change a result of that. So if you wanted to stay consistent, this question could also be, are you in favor of more mixed-use development in the commercial districts, mix of retail, office, or residential? Which was actually question 9 on business survey.
I think that we probably should use the language in the other survey because this one to me seems a little bit limiting when you state as the purpose of the mixed use to enable
Yeah.
easier access and reduce strain on, the city's transportation network. That's sort of,
That may not be the
there
only
may be other
No, within
reasons.
a
There may be
question.
other reasons
Within a
and
question.
That's not necessarily the only criteria.
No.
And it may not even be the important criteria.
Right, so if we'll take number 5, if everybody's in agreement, and we will make that number 9 from the business survey, which said what I just reiterated. So that way we have consistent, we're not making statements within a question or changing the wording of a question. Okay, and then we'll change the answer, or the yes or no. Okay, the same one on page 3, which is the Likert scale. Once again, they're asking for statements and do a question. So the question is, how satisfied are you with the following elements as they relate to residential development, instead of rate your level of agreement with the necessity of improvements to the following? So we're recommending to remove the highlighted.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. Everybody's on board with that one. Go to page 4.
What, can I ask a question? Mix of housing types, what do you mean by that?
Exactly housing, it could be duplexes, apartments, single families, so that's housing types, like the structures of housing.
You think people will understand that those are the types that we're talking about?
We could put mix of housing structures, mix of housing units,
A variety.
a variety of housing, I mean, it's,
Types is okay, but
yeah,
variety's
types is
a
either
good word,
yeah.
maybe.
A variety, is that better than mix?
I like variety, yeah.
Spice of life.
Right.
Variety of housing types. We can put units or structures in there if you want. Structures might, but it's dwelling units, so. Everybody good on 3? Now we go to page 4. Once again, statement versus question.
What's the question?
Number 13, page 4. This is, what level of importance do you place on the following actions the city of Rehoboth Beach could take to improve and or protect the natural environment in the city versus rating the following actions the city could take to improve?
I think that makes sense.
Like I said, by pushing us to the Likert scale to do the research of the filtering, helped Shannon actually change the statements versus questions, so that was good research. Page 6, item 18. And once again, we're going through our changes because we made all the changes by our notes, and you can be able to see that in a final format of how it flows as well. So this one again, do you think the city of Rehoboth Beach should actively promote the following elements as economic development strategies and key components of maintaining a high quality of life? Versus the statement.
Which one is this?
18, page 6. Might be the same thing on number 20, page 7, question versus statement. What level of importance do you place on the following elements? Number 24, page 8. How strongly do you agree with the following statements? And now we're to actual questions. So page 10, question number 27. Do you believe that the following elements need more attention in the city? We're like, is this wording okay or should we change it? So we were wondering if you were okay with that question.
Issues instead of elements, maybe? I don't know. Elements is fine. I don't know what really matters. What do you think?
Issues? I like issues better.
Change
So
it to issues.
do we assume that they're issues?
Um,
That's the question, like,
Do we,
if we
do
put
we
issues
even
in
need
there.
a word there?
Pardon me?
Do we even need a word, elements or issues?
Do you believe the
Do you
following needs more
believe that
attention?
the following
Yeah.
need more attention?
Remove elements is good.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
good.
Do you believe the following need more attention in the city?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That works.
That was nice.
Great.
All right, Rick.
Very elegant.
That's great. We're getting ready to get all in that. You just, okay, number 28. Number 28 is,
Can we hang on there for a second? We had talked a number of times about green technology required for homes, new construction, and yet I don't see it listed any place.
it wasn't a comment from the last meeting or written, so do you want us to insert it? Because we're just going over the ones from the last
There
meeting.
was something in one of the questions.
I
I thought there was.
It is
Yeah.
Jeff, I
Huh?
think. had
Yeah,
given
yeah.
us
Jeff had,
language.
the effects of climate change. When we get to that. You have climate change where you have the green technology.
well, climate change is one
well,
thing,
green
but I
technology is
think
different
the
than
question
climate
of, in construction,
Yeah.
green technology, basically, I thought that we had,
That's even important, and there's a differentiation, I think, between business and residential.
well,
Because, you know,
it's
like
got
hotels can be
underground
designated
utilities.
as.
Effective climate change is at the end,
So,
but
You had something.
I'd like to add.
the implementation of green technology, I would say, in new construction or in construction.
we'll just put implementation of green technology because it could be redevelopment. Okay.
There was one in what used to be question 31, the goals for the town. We added at the very end, and I remember this was Jeff's addition, encourage environmental sustainability practices.
Yeah.
Maybe that's elsewhere in here.
We,
Yep.
in 27, we don't seem to have renewable energy, though. I mean, that speaks, renewable energy sources speaks directly
Right.
to the building code.
I'd like, we have one thing I wanted to mention is, what's the term?
Jeff, when you talk about renewable energy, that's generally a much broader global investment that is done by governments, businesses, et cetera, to work in a certain technology area. The implementation of green technology can be done by anybody when they build a house.
Could be wind,
And
solar,
so
wind,
I
both.
differentiate.
I think green is,
Okay.
yeah. I
We're
think
going to add
that-
implementation of green technology.
It's a big bucket,
Yep.
yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I think it's a big bucket.
You'll be able to see it for a final round, too.
Yep.
Okay, so 28, we went to question versus statement. How do you feel about the following descriptors for the city of Rehoboth Beach? And I think once we take our notes off and our highlights, you're gonna see some of these might be redundant when you see the final product. But at least you'll be able to go through it if you have to cut.
I want to add another one, or suggest adding another one to 27, if you don't mind.
What's that?
Sidewalks, the sort of inconsistency of sidewalks in certain, throughout the city.
That's in transportation.
To me, it's always been a sort of a recurring issue. I just want to be able to address it.
Yeah, that's a big.
We have that covered in transportation under, I believe. Yeah, so you're adding some questions here besides the green technology one, but we're adding some questions that have already been asked in other sections because we're only going over the changes that we've
Okay,
implemented all your changes. We're only going over our comments for clarification
Yep,
is what our
okay,
presentation was today. So I think when you see the final format, you're gonna see some of these might roll into each other as you go through it and sleep and open it up again.
Right.
Okay, so then we go to page 12, number 30.
Were you doing
Wait,
on
sorry.
28?
So, yeah, 28, how do you feel about the following? And take descriptors out? Great idea by Rick Perry. Do we think we need to take the word descriptors again out? I just stole your thunder on that. How do you feel about the following for the city of Rehoboth Beach? And then we go to page 12, statement
What number?
20, it's the highlighted one. It's always comments on the side, oh,
29?
30.
yeah. Because you don't have their comments up there. Okay. Select your level of agreement. So this is a statement versus a question. Again, how do you feel about the following possible goals for the city of Rehoboth Beach? Is everybody okay with that one?
To strike possible goals and just have following? I don't know, in a way, goals is kind of,
These were actually goals because we took some of,
Yeah.
yep, these
so
we
I
actually
think
left
goals
alone.
probably fits
Yep.
there.
We just put, instead of select your level, we actually put
I'm
the
not,
question.
I'm not sure that C is you want to limit it to the entrance routes to the community. I think,
So do you want to go back through you're going back through what we've done the past 3 meetings, which is fine, but for our time constraints, we just were going over our comments for the final. So we've already been through all of these questions, and we entered in all the data. If you have additional questions, you guys might want to give us additional comments, because we didn't go through all of them, unfortunately.
I think you misunderstood me. Entrance, enhance the safety of the entrance routes?
I understand.
How about the other routes?
I understand, but I guess my question is, if we're going through the answers of all of these as we're finding them individually, we did that the last meeting.
Yeah, but these
So-
are just tweaks.
Okay, yep,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. What would you like number C to read as?
I think that really speaks to the roundabout, doesn't it?
I don't know.
It could be the gateway, enhance the safety of the gateway to the community, gateways to the community.
There are 3 entrances. I don't know that.
Well, I mean, but it implies that, to me, when I read that, it implies that that's the only concern for safety is the entrance routes. And I think safety in general is important.
It's just because we have safety covered. Remember, you had us add that section in transportation about safety, pedestrians, intersections. We
right,
covered
we do have
that.
that.
This one is your gateways, your entrance ways. So how do they feel that that's a goal to enhance your, and we can say gateways if that's a better terminology.
You also got safety mentioned in K for traffic.
I mean, I think that, the entrances to the city, particularly coming over the canal, with the bike traffic and everything there, I think, that's a little bit different, consideration than just the general safety of, traffic in the city.
And your gateways are what I'm going to call, not in a negative way, but a bottleneck.
Yes.
3 ways in that people are more known of, I should say. There's a couple other side streets, but if you have the.
No, there's only 3 ways in.
Oh, that's true. 3, yeah.
So there's only 4 if you come by sea.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
One if by land, 2 if by sea.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Question seems, it's kind of a funny question in the sense that all the selections are positive things. I mean, there's no asking for any comments on anything that's controversial. I mean, for example, enhance the safety of, entrance routes. Is somebody going to say, I strongly disagree with that? Or, manage future growth, I strongly disagree. I mean, I just see this, if I were taking this, I would put an X in the first column and put a line all the way down and say, I
or no
strongly
opinion.
agree with all of them.
It could be no opinion because you don't even know the entrance routes. Like you're getting confused on, is it on 1? I mean, you could not pay attention to the map and think that your entrance is 1. You could think it's where the roundabout is. So the other one is ours, the same method if that's the thought. Enhance the beauty of the city by encouraging landscaping. Well, I would hope everybody would say yes on that too.
Yeah, I think that everybody's going to say,
Encourage living, working, and shopping in the city. That one could be a variable, but,
I think
Well, we're talking about goals, though.
yep, absolutely.
weighting of it, I think, I think it's
Yeah.
what's more important, I think that's the idea.
Yeah, if you were to ask, instead of
Instead of agree and disagree.
instead of agreeing or disagreeing, if you were to ask, circle the 5 most important
yeah,
things,
maybe that's.
the answers
That's
would.
not the Likert scale, though.
Oh, well, I understand, but it might get you more of an answer of what you're looking for, of the importance of these things. Because, as Lee says, every one is sort of
Yeah,
important.
the question's almost like if you had a limited budget,
Note that might be-
which are the most 5 most important things to focus on?
Well, if you change it, talking about relative importance to
Yeah,
very important, somewhat important, not important.
or,
really
rate them
not
on a scale of 1 to 10 as to importance or something.
How
and then-
about,
Level of
this may be
importance.
one where you don't want it as a question, but as a statement, and you might want to say, the city of Rehoboth Beach should pursue the following goals. And you get strongly agree, no opinion.
I guess the question is, they aren't the city of not all of them are the city of Rehoboth Beach's goals because we didn't pull from the old plan or the plan before that. So could be an assumption that they are, these are possible goals that we're thinking about. But what if we were to take the question format, maybe easier, of question 31? How important are the possible goals for the city of Rehoboth Beach? And you do extremely important, very important, so you're getting your scale of 5. Versus going through the one thing that if we start changing and get away from the Likert scale and start putting rate 1 through 10, then we're putting weight on exactly how people drop off. But if we say extremely important, very important, moderately important, we're at least getting that back.
Yeah, then you're getting
Right. So
data
we could
on
say-
which are the most important.
Yeah, I think that's a better.
Yeah.
So wordsmith it like question number 31 with the scale like 31.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Yes. And that way we're consistent in our ranking,
Yeah.
still with 5. Okay, we'll wordsmith that for the draft final. Okay, so now I know that didn't help us much on the visitor one.
Can I mention one thing that I just neglected to do when we were going through it? Just one small thing. On question 17, where it says, do you think investment in the following would strengthen the downtown? And I know on most of the others, we had said last week, put in City of Rehoboth Beach, and there's probably a little redundancy because it's in every question, which is fine. But my concern here by saying downtown is that people might think it's only for like Rehoboth Avenue or Baltimore or Wilmington, whereas crosswalks are maybe in other areas of the city.
We have that in safety.
I mean, that may be the only one.
Those,
Or even local transportation. It seems like to me D and E could be in other parts than just the downtown. So I didn't know if we wanted to say strengthen the city rather than limiting it to downtown.
so we addressed half of these in transportation. Local transportation alternatives, the crosswalks, the safety, the security. So this is investments that you were thinking, like the changing station.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. But
Would that be in
was
other
it meant
places?
to imply that it was just on the downtown?
We were told to change it to downtown.
Okay, okay, all right, that's fine.
And if we needed to put street names on there, if that helped, we could do that.
Well, it's there in on B, Baltimore, Wilmington, but you could say Rehoboth Avenue, Baltimore, Wilmington, First, Second, I don't know.
Would we be alienating anybody besides those three? Any side streets?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's First Street,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
Second Street.
Yeah, so,
Say Rehoboth,
there's Lake Ave.
commercial
Downtown
district or
area?
something?
say what?
Like Rehoboth Commercial District or Business District or something?
Or the downtown commercial
Yeah,
district?
people
or-
wouldn't know the district name. They would know area, but they won't know what is your commercial district. Is it one street? Is it three? Is it side streets?
It's a perception of downtown.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And everyone's going to be a little different.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you get a preponderance of answers, it shows you a direction.
Agree.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so.
So then we're to the visitor to find out additional questions you might want. Like I said, I know this is the first time you've seen this one, so I just want to find out in the next half an hour what questions we want to pull over here. And once again, don't have a problem at all. If that's what you want to do, is get the final formats and then go through and see the 5 final formats and say, this is a good question on community to bring it over to visitor. It's completely up to you. If you want to go through on the screen, one recommendation could be Dave could pull up the community survey and we go through and say, should any of these come over the visitor? That might be the easiest way.
What do you want on the screen?
The community survey.
Oh, you want it back on the screen?
Yep, and then we're gonna have the visitor survey in our hand to say what.
Okay.
Does everybody feel this is visitor or not? Might be the easiest mechanism.
Okay.
All right, so the visitors they have a discussion about land use. So number one, am I assuming no, would not come on the visitor survey?
Because I think we've asked elsewhere how they use,
The uses. Yeah,
that's
how
what
they
I was
use
getting
it.
at, yeah.
How they use lodging, how they use patronizing, how they shop, where we think investment should be, how you do the following activities. So it's more a user approach.
I think the visitor survey should have a couple of open-ended questions.
Yeah, we just got
And
this Wednesday afternoon.
There's just
Yep.
number 9, I
So,
guess, is
yep.
really the only one.
right.
So one thing we might be able to do is I actually like the questions on the business survey. Maybe we say, what do you, like the questions about, how do you think, open-ended, how do you think Rehoboth can improve your visitor, your time spent as a visitor? I'm trying to think of what result you would get, because you had a couple open-ended questions on the business one.
Yeah.
And we had a couple on the community that was, oh, there we go. On the business survey. What enticed you to open a business in the city of Rehoboth Beach? What entices you to visit Rehoboth Beach?
Yeah, could do that.
Okay, so number 17 from the business. What are the biggest benefits of having your business in the city of Rehoboth Beach? I'm not sure what are the biggest? Oh, what are the challenges you face as a visitor in the city of Rehoboth Beach? Is it like accessibility we talked about?
Yeah, that's good, those are good.
Okay, number 19 from the business survey.
I think another one might be, what changes have you noticed in the city of Rehoboth in recent years?
Changes noticed in recent years.
Question 5?
Yeah, it's basically a.
Number
spin-off of
5 for what?
Yeah.
Which
Well,
survey?
what I just suggested
On the
was a
business
spin-off
survey,
of number
you
5
make
for the
the
business survey.
Has your clientele
5 in business,
changed?
okay.
I guess other changes.
Number 5 in business.
But instead of asking about clientele, we just say, has the city, do you think the city's changed? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
or,
We
I don't know.
probably.
Yeah, we can wordsmith those a little
What
bit
if,
for
what
you.
if we took number 8 from the business and said, what is the one thing that attracts you to the city of Rehoboth Beach the most?
Open-ended?
Open-ended?
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Or what could be done to motivate you to visit more?
Yeah, actually, this one is about attracting more,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so.
All right, so what do we just have to be
So
very
what is
clear.
one thing that can be done to
What did you say about that,
attract you to
Rick?
visit more? I don't know.
What was your,
Well, yeah, what is the one thing you think can be done to attract you more to the city of Rehoboth Beach? Or to attract you to visit Rehoboth
Say
Beach
visit
more,
yep,
yeah.
okay,
more often, yeah. More
okay.
frequently, any of
We can
those.
wordsmith that one. And then what was the follow-up to that? It was, what is the one thing that attracts you to visit more type approach? Then wasn't there a second part of that that talked over the, it was, or was it still the one thing? Okay.
Well, I think
gotcha.
there are two one things,
Yeah.
maybe. There's what one thing attracts you as a visitor to Rehoboth Beach, and then what one thing
D-tracks?
can be done to attract you to visit Rehoboth Beach more frequently or more, or whatever. I think they're two different questions.
So increase activity,
Yes.
increase attractiveness.
Increase
Okay.
attractiveness.
Except for eliminating parking meters.
Yeah.
That'll give us two, if we go back to the visitor survey, that would put us at 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 questions, which was something that we wanted to be smaller, correct? On top of the demographics, by the way, because we don't have those in there.
In the visitors survey, the first question, this is reinventing the wheel again, but I think we should have beach and boardwalk when we're rating the safety of these major parts.
Then we need to probably,
Pedestrian, bicycle, vehicles,
Absolutely.
so
ADA.
change that back into the community survey, because they were pulled directly from there,
Oh,
which is a good comment, which will be right, I gotta find the question. It'll be one from the community survey. What number?
That's number 7.
Yes, so we also changed, nope,
Well,
it should
no,
be
it's
under
not number 7.
transportation, right?
Number 9.
Number 9, sorry. So number 9 and number 9 in the community, number 1 in the visitor would be, you said beaches?
beach and boardwalk.
Beach and boardwalk. All right, so we're gonna change those in both locations for consistency. Any others for visitor? So the formatting for 1 through 11 is already completed through the community survey, but we're trying to get any new. Like I said, that will take you to 16 questions without the demographic questions. So we know those are gonna be how, the visitor lodging questions will be put in there.
And but the only other thing you might, and I guess it would go in demographics, is to get at, to maybe have one statement there, I live in 19971, but not in the city. Do we want to try to get at how close some of the visitors are?
We've talked about outside city limits.
Okay,
So do you want to put weight on the people more that are right on the outskirts of town versus the people that visit
from New Jersey or
Right,
from
or-
Pennsylvania.
Dover, Delaware? I mean, so we can put that in the demographics, and you might, I would say, how much do you have to drill down on that, and then what goals would you set from outside is outside?
Right.
Even though they contribute, local people, we assume, would contribute more, we would assume would contribute more. But I think that's a good question to look at when we get the demographics in here to say if we're missing a
Okay,
population.
yeah.
The flow will be better once you get the demographics piped in here.
Would it be like the demographic age question? Could we maybe say, how far do you travel to get to Rehoboth? And then have,
For the
2
visitor?
miles, 5 miles, 10 miles,
In the
50
visitor one?
miles. Yeah,
Yep,
could we
okay,
structure
yep.
it that way?
That'd be a
Yep.
good way to do it, yeah.
So do miles instead of location?
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah,
okay,
that's good. yeah.
yep. Okay. Another good one sometimes for the visitor is, I think let me just double check, frequency. How often do you visit?
Yeah,
and put
isn't that in there?
this? We
I thought that was in the
have,
demographic, I thought I'd,
oh, yeah, how often do you shop? We have, how often do you patronize a business? How often do you do the following activities? Actually, it breaks it down. You have to do one of those categories to get quantified, I guess.
how often do you do the following activities? How often do you patronize a business? How often do you shop? I mean,
I don't think
But it
it's,
doesn't say how many times they visit.
yep, okay,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's put a category
right,
down.
yeah.
Because that'll flow really good into the lodging, like, we have the lodging, the breakdown of lodging in the beginning of it. So what we can do then is, we will draft these in the final paper format. So you will be losing demographics, because it will be populated within your 3 surveys. So we'll have a business survey, community survey, and a visitor survey for your final review and comments. And we're actually not going to come and do those comment by comment by comment. We're actually gonna send those to you and have the comments emailed back to us. If we feel we need to have a meeting, then we can collect a meeting, but since we've presented this now, we've been through this since December, we're hoping we're getting closer, but if anybody has any direct comments once they see the final, feel free to email us directly and we can provide those collectively. We just want everybody's opinion and everybody's input on the survey.
So you want 9 responses, 9 individual responses?
We actually prefer individual responses because it gets people to speak without being filtered in any way. We don't mind that at all. We do it all the time, but that way we can say, out of 9 people, we've received 7. We don't call out the names, and here's the changes that
Well,
were made.
plus it's for open meeting requirements, it better meets the go, because then we're not all talking to each other and we're talking
Absolutely.
directly to you.
And some people are willing to say things directly to a consultant, but they might want to say publicly, and we can put it collectively. So what we thought we would do is, on that final format, we'd send that out. We'll give it to you in the Word format, so hopefully you can do track changes.
All right.
And then we would go through and give you track changes on the final input. So you'd see this in a final standpoint with everybody's changes, or to say, 2 people are saying the opposite thing, we need a clarification. So if you like this format, we think this is really easy to kind of go through, and it's organized a little easier.
Good.
So we'll spend some time and get this back to you. And the other thing we had to do was to research filtering, and I'm gonna have Shannon go into the filtering the Survey Monkey. She did research that. We sent you as much as you wanna read about it. We sent you the background of how you can filter, the types of filtering, and it's a KCI account for the Survey Monkey. So we have a lot of different options to be able to do, but the output of it, I think, with what we gave is exactly what you would want. So you wanna go into just a little bit of what you found and what you tested?
So I know we had a little bit of kind of a concern of, can you break it down to be like, okay, if you're a property owner, how did you answer this? And you can actually do that. So on our end, after we get all the responses, you can actually add filters. It's under the question answer filter type. I don't know if you guys have taken a look at it, but so you can kind of go in and be like, did they answer yes, they're a property owner, to question whatever of asking that. And then if you're concerned about, of the property owners, did they answer this question a certain way, you can also add that filter. So then you can kind of look at how many people answered that way.
So an example of that would be, if you want to know the property owners, or like we said, the residential property owners, and you wanted to filter it by, we want all the results from the residential property owners. Here's the filter of that. Now we want to break it down to say we want the residential property owners that own property that are seasonal, part-time, full-time. That can be broken down as well. So that the output of this is an Excel spreadsheet that we can be able to take information and sort and chart, and we can filter in advance. So we're hoping that addressed that. We just needed to make sure and double check in the system that we were able to do that. And you're actually able to do a lot more. It just depends on what. We know that we can give you the data, you can sort it, you can scope it, you can go through it and analyze it as much as you possibly want. We have pre-populated tables, charts, and graphs that come out from each question. And then if it needs to be drilled down from there, we just come back in the scope. Because in our scope is, how did people answer each question and what category they are? So if we want to drill it down even further, we'll just have to just say, what categories do you want to see? How do you want to see it?
Can I ask a question? When the survey is completed, it's totally finished, and now that resides, I assume, on Oracle or something on SurveyMonkey servers. Does the city then end up having ownership of that
So
work product?
we own it, we give it to you in Excel, and any information that we have in PowerPoint or any deliverable that we can provide. But the SurveyMonkey is under KCI licensing. So we would give you the Excel spreadsheet, the questions, the output of it, any result that you would use for another survey.
Okay, so
Yep.
the data exists as cells
software
in the
does
Excel
it. Yep.
spreadsheet, which then you can go in using the tools that are in Excel and massage it to the
Absolutely.
extent that you want. Okay,
You can also take it and then export it into SurveyMonkey or another, so a future survey. So let's say you want to do this another 5 years, some of the questions, you can just take that information and export it. I think the thing that we like about it is the simplicity of the output of the charts and tables that come out to say, here's the results of the questions. Every town's different. Some of the towns just want the exact questions because they want to say, are you a resident or not? In different towns, they drill down a little differently. So you wouldn't know until you get the data back. But I can tell you there's a couple things. In a couple municipalities, they've actually had the output of every question gets put in the back as appendix in the comp plan. And that gets fairly large. Or it can be a separate attachment, but that's actually data to support all the goals and objectives. Yep. So that's not data we would want to hang on to. We'd definitely give you every possible mechanism we have for you to have it.
Could I back up to one thing on the community survey? Hate to backtrack, but question 26, could we possibly add encourage meeting green building standards?
Just building
Green building standards?
instead of green technology?
No,
I'm just
no,
asking
no,
about.
in addition, I'm.
Oh, okay.
In question 26.
Right, so I was just looking at consistency of implementation of green technology, and you're saying green buildings, because there's BMPs, there's other things besides buildings. You want green practices? I was trying to
I guess if that is understood to encompass
yeah,
a broader.
like you're talking about lead and
Yeah,
everything.
yes, exactly.
Sometimes lead, BMPs.
Yeah.
We did have a wording that we might be able to use again, which was that practices one. Encourage environmental practices and planning, but this is actually infrastructure. Maybe we use the word infrastructure.
Infrastructure, yeah, green
Okay.
building infrastructure.
So how important are the following objectives? So are we saying implementation of green infrastructure?
Encourage,
Encourage.
I think, probably.
Mandate, require. A little too strong?
No,
Go too strong.
there's no leading in those words at all, I'm sure. Okay. Okay.
Okay, now I'll be quiet.
Deb, how long do you think it's going to take to format this, and when do you think a launch would be?
So we have to go back and look at our schedule because we bumped 3 other client deliverables this week to meet this one. So we'll have to go back and see. I'll have to get back with you on the deliverable date for the draft. I know that we have some other pertinent, downtown development districts are due on Wednesday for towns, so that's a governor-driven direction. So we're getting, priorities are for those, it's for next week, but we'll see. I should be able to email the group back and let you know when we can have a deliverable. I wouldn't say too far out, but I just can't guarantee it's gonna be, we're not working this weekend, or nights.
Do you want to look at the chart for the,
Yeah,
Sure.
if I could just plant the seed, because I think if we can plant the seed, if I can leave early, that's even better, because I'm traveling to Newark. But if I think we can plant the seed here to think about what, the workshops and some thoughts, some recommendations we have, and then I think we need to be a part of the conversation on the workshops if the commission doesn't mind, because we're actually charged to manage those. So on the left side of this document, the workshops in 2010 they were all done on Saturdays, and they had the following topics, and they had details of those. So before we get into the details, it's kind of like getting to the topics. And if you start with you can do it either way. You get in the details, put them in the topics. A lot of the charrettes and the workshops are actually broader-based topics that then get into different discussions underneath. If you pull one category out, one specific category, it could be interpreted that that's what the Planning Commission and the city cares most about. So for example, I'll just say sea level rise. If you want to have a sea level rise workshop all in itself, the perception could be you're not covering all the other environmental things that we've discussed as the Planning Commission. So under environment, can we do the green practices? Can we talk about those? Can we talk about the trees? Can we talk about the sea level rise? Can we talk about flooding? Can those be captured under a category? So 1 through 7 on the right-hand side is some of the topic titles we've used in the past for workshops to say rather than come in with one specific topic, you could set up stations. If you have one specific topic, it's more of an education. So for example, if you wanted to talk about sea level rise in the city of Rehoboth Beach as an entire approach, we would recommend DENREC come down here and do a presentation for you. They're the actually holders of it. They've got the latest mapping. They know where that's going to head. They know what funding's available. Have them do a workshop to educate the commission as a whole. The citizens could come to the meeting as well. Or we can set up a stand where DENREC would come and host sea level rise if that's a specific topic. But to have its own workshop, the thought is you could have so many on topic-driven details that you don't get to hit some of the other options if that's important to the people attending. So in our scope, one of our recommendations was the workshop approach, which would be setting up somewhere where you'd have tables where people can come talk about the topics that are important to them. So if we had environment, we had a sea level rise table, we had flooding, we had environmental, how important is it, with the dots, the questions, all of that has to be formulated, but at least the people that are interested in that topic or the umbrella, let's say, they could come and have opinions and questions and discussions with board of commissioners, planning commissioners, our staff, whoever will help volunteer that, and have open dialogue at those stations. If it's not as important to them, why have them sit through it? Why steer them to that one topic when it might be really, really important or they want to learn more about it? So stations is kind of an approach we'd like to talk about with Rehoboth. That's what we kind of thought in the beginning. And how can we get some of these other topics you've talked about to fall under these? Nothing's to say it'll fall under 7, but those are the 7 that usually capture a lot. Transportation, we've talked about the bike, the ped, the sidewalk, the safety, the intersections. What do we want to be able to talk and get more information outside of the survey? Because the first job is to promote the survey, but are we to the education portion? Because if people say, my number one concern in Rehoboth is sidewalks, because I walk this town every single day and that's my number one concern. Maybe they're not concerned at all. Maybe they're not a biker. Maybe they don't really care about that kind of topic. So I think if we could, our recommendation, like I said, I want to plant the seed to have future discussions, is to do it umbrella-driven with topics underneath and to set up some stations. Unless we feel this format is less inviting for people to come up and be honest, because I know it's a public meeting, but it's less inviting. It's more this side, that side.
The difficulty with stations, as I see it, I understand what you're doing. You're making access to people for specific things that they're interested in. The difficulty with stations is that you can't have all members of the Planning Commission hearing the conversations.
That's correct.
And I think, quite honestly, since a lot of the global thought about the issues really relates to the Planning Commission, who deals with this on an ongoing basis, it's very important that all members hear those comments.
I guess the reason we've suggested it's been successful in other venues is because we have the Planning Commission members chair or be a captain every single station. And you trust each other to relay the information back and take the notes back, or have our staff take the notes back, because that's collecting information unless you're doing a presentation and giving statements, because the purpose of these is open dialogue and education. So if we had a station on transportation, we probably want to look at the facts. Do people know that there's state-maintained roads, town-maintained roads? Do they know, like those kind of facts? Do you know that you have this many miles of street? So do we want to give them some factual information and then get some input? And we're not saying that you only have to do the 7 topics or 7 workshops, but I think it's a very, we get a lot of feedback, and actually, the City of Newcastle is probably the most successful one, where each Planning Commission member had a station, and we had information, we collected it back, they filled out sticky notes, or they filled out documents, and they put them all on different maps. There's different methods you could use, because we're not there yet. but they collected all of this back, so it wasn't a minute-taking approach. It wasn't that cumbersome. It was more collecting the data back and saying, here's what we received on station number 1. Here's what we received on station number 2. So we just wanted to kind of plant the seed. I know we have to have more dialogue on this and figure out how we want to do it and what approaches.
I know that I raised this several meetings back, and I agree with David. I don't think it's a question of whether or not we trust our colleagues on the Planning Commission to
Probably wrong
give,
word.
truthful feedback. I think it's important for all the commissioners to get a sense of the, in some cases, what the passion of, the people are at the meeting for certain topics. I think we all know we have a lot of people who are, have very strong views in this city about a lot of different topics. And I think without actually experiencing how, the participants are actually reacting to various issues, even if you get feedback on, there were a lot of people interested in, the environment, or there were a lot of people concerned about climate change, you're not really getting the sense of exactly, at the end of the day and listening to all of the workshops or, meetings with the commission, where the priorities are overall. I just think the interpersonal interaction with people is very important for everyone to experience.
So the other thought too is if you wanted to do it in this forum, I assume that's what you're recommending, is there would be a topic and somebody would run the meeting to say, what do you think about this? What's your ideas on this? Because we wouldn't be able to steer direction. So the purpose of the workshops is to obtain data, obtain input on specific topics. And we have surveys to cover a lot of that. But the part about the workshops, and especially on Saturdays, is people show up to the topics that they're interested in, and then it goes availability in the schedule. So that is one collection data point. The SWOT was another one. This is another one. So I would say how many people attended the workshops before? Do you have any attendance records of the topics, maybe that's, or output data, collective output data, other than what was heard?
It might be in the minutes, I don't know.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I don't know the specifics, but you're absolutely right. People come generally for a specific topic.
Yep.
And the thing that I worry about is that my experience is when you start those kinds of discussions, all of a sudden there's feedback and interaction between the people that are participating. The expectation that someone will come from the audience, so to speak, and give you the information that you need then to take back to everybody else, that's, my experience is that doesn't happen. It's a catalyst kind of thing. You start a discussion about a certain topic, and people explore, all of a sudden their minds get expanded and explore. And from that standpoint, it seems to me that the interaction with more people who have the background, let's say, of the history of it, it's better that way, as Rick has described. So we have to think this out.
And that's just the history of our community.
And I just wanted to drop it because I think when you sit in those chairs up there and you have the public, there's also a perception in outreach, and I do outreach all the time. There's a perception, Team A, Team B. We have that perception sometimes. So in the public outreach for dialogue, the Planning Commission members can start going into personal feelings. And history is one thing, history and data, but perceptions and feelings from commissioners versus the public are two separate things as well. So I think if this is the setting that is the preferred, we can say if there's any alternatives or how you want these meetings to be ran. We're not used to the meeting format in this format. We come up with some
First of all, let me just correct something. In the experience that we had for the 2010, we didn't sit here. That is, the Planning Commission didn't sit in this format. We sat at tables all around. So it was table related. It's just a question of whether it's a person or two person representing the gathering of information. It's really parallel
the
versus.
same thing that I pitched the first time, just on a smaller, narrow scale. It's a workshop table.
Yeah, right. Except that more of the planning commission were involved in each one versus,
Right.
so it's sort of parallel versus serial. And
I could see ultimately doing perhaps some of each, to having
Right,
one
yeah,
workshop day
Yeah.
where you have these tables. Because Joyce or somebody said that was done once before. I didn't realize that, but she's something about how that had been done one other time. So I could see doing that down the road, maybe after the survey results come in or something.
Yes, yep.
I definitely, but at the same
What do people have
time,
to say?
some of the, and many of the workshop topics from 2010 tie in directly to the topics
Absolutely.
you've got listed here, even though they may be worded slightly differently. But the thing I keep going back to is the starting point that this group talked about in February was to start with that envision an ideal future, which was last time. But I think the consensus here was that should be our starting point. And I think we'd like to do that very soon.
And probably as the commission as a whole,
Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah, but I mean with the public, I mean have it be
Yeah.
the first public
Yeah.
workshop.
Yeah,
So that would be the topic of the first public workshop, yeah.
So what do you do at that workshop? I'm curious as to what questions do you ask? How do you dialogue? What data are you bringing in for those workshops?
We have to think
Well,
about
I would think first an explanation as to what the CDP process is and why we do it. And secondly would be to say, this isn't an A group and a B group, this is us. And we as the planning commissioners are really asking you to tell us what's important to you for the future of the city. How do you envision it? We just want to hear. We're not here to tell you what it should be. We want to know what you think it should
So
be.
it's open-ended.
So they'll come up to the mic, they'll stand at the table or come to the table or record it and say how they feel, what they want, which is what we're asking for in a survey as well. So I assume that first one would be, we're launching the survey in addition to that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Because really the survey is, you've got the questions of what you want. It would be anything outside of that. So that dialogue the weight of that meeting, that first meeting, if you stick to that envision, is a data that's collected on how people feel and a weight that would be considerable for the goals. So each workshop is a weight as well of data, and same thing as this, that we're gonna ask them again. So maybe it would be looking at these questions to say, would just be as open-ended as that, where they would come up and say, this is what I see?
yeah.
Yeah,
There are some, obviously, there are some subjects that we need data in order to sort of guide us as to what's important. There are some subjects that are pretty well defined already, that I feel that you could almost start a workshop. And one of them certainly is the issue of multi-housing, the downtown
Mixed use.
mixed-use housing. I mean, we've been down that road before. We know how complex it is. Most people, if you were to sit down and grab a group of people that had some interest in that, if you had 10 people, you'd probably have 15 ideas of what mixed-use housing was to them. And most of them would not have thought out or been exposed to what some of the potential problems are, or what the impact of that might be if you were to have it, whether it's safety issues, whether it's parking.
Perception.
Yeah,
That's-
yeah,
so-
and those things sort of evolve as you discuss it.
Right. So the perception of that is making sure that the board understands that like you said, the goal is to hear the people.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
on the mixed-use topic, we've asked that in every survey on the mixed use. So you're asking that question, and if you feel that that topic is gonna get more dialogue sitting around a counter, because that is, one of the commissioners Board of Commissioners have asked that to be on the Planning Commission plate for this CDP, so we know that that's one of the items that were asked. So we've asked that in the survey. You feel that we'll get additional dialogue in a workshop setting, but remember that this output may say, we want to see mixed use because we were vague enough to not talk about the pros and cons, because that gets actually completed in the regulation process. And then when we sit down, people are going to be afforded the opportunity to talk about pros and cons or some negative impacts it could have. So that data, I'm just thinking the result of the data is something to think about. So what I want to do is, we're going to get ready to leave, but I want to just leave it with maybe the thoughts of can you think of topics underneath the 7 umbrellas and then see if you have a workshop that maybe covers more than just one topic? Is that,
Yeah.
or
yeah.
similar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because maybe you could have an environmental workshop like you talked about, like how you started with the envision. Maybe then the next one you might want to say is be able to say, okay, let's talk about the environment, because we have to educate a little bit
right,
there.
right.
Probably, right, and bring some maps in, bring in the sea level rise, bring in the floodplain map, so there's an education, and then say, now that we've showed you some of this information, what concerns do you have? Do you know what sea level rise is? And really make it palatable to see. Do you know what the floodplain, do you know? And make it palatable to see, they'd have enough information.
Well, I think one thing we could consider doing probably is coming up with a schedule, like one Saturday would be Environmental Saturday.
Right.
And then we try to come up with a schedule of the various subtopics that we would cover and let the public know, starting at 10
Yes.
o'clock, we're gonna be discussing X topic. So that people can sort of plan when
Come
they
and go. That's good.
come to the portions that they're interested in and not have to sit through everything.
So Rick, that's a good blend of what we were doing with stations and actually making it
Yeah.
time slots.
And that's what you did before, right? You had-
Yes, well, the only question is, station-wise, I take your reading of stations as we've got 10 tables out there, 10 stations, and they're populated by 9 of us. or
Right, no,
10
I just said that he just did a blend, so to me, you're blending it, say, we'd still use our idea of a station, but it's the topic during the time.
Right,
time
right,
slot.
precisely,
Right, yeah.
precisely.
So environments
Yeah.
from 1 to 3, and
Absolutely. Yeah,
transportation's from
And
3 to 5.
you start going to the
and-
chalkboard and say, what
and
do you
that's
even
what was
feel
done
environment
before.
is?
Yeah.
What are your things that you feel environmental, you're concerned about, your dangers?
Yeah, I recall when we did transportation, there were people that were very much interested in cars. Okay, well, how are we going to handle cars, parking, et cetera?
Automated electric,
We had the bicycle group that were, they weren't interested in cars other than not being hit by them.
Right.
Okay, but they were interested in bicycling. And so we sort of spread those topics out and then,
so we're trying to, if we can, have the survey stand on its own merit with questions. This is a mechanism, so if we try to educate and get dialogue, we still want people to ask the questions in the survey, because that way we're getting their true yes or no opinion. So I think we could try to work on a blend probably with a schedule. Our schedule right now is the survey, because we have to lay the staff up, we have to get the draft to you. But I think we can look at maybe the 7 topics and see if we can get some subtitles for you to see if that would work, and start finding out what we would bring as a recommendation to that presentation day, that Saturday with topics, and then see what else you might want to add on that.
yeah.
to keep it very
I think
neutral.
what I would do is I would look at that list and say, okay, AB blank, 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 we need the survey information before we can sort of describe what it
Categorize
is.
them.
But there's a couple of those up there that we don't need the survey. We can start on that. And if we could start on that,
So we need time to do the work, which is why we needed the surveys in December.
understand.
We now have to find out what you want for each workshop. So our job is to categorize it, to get your input on that, to say, does this fall within your needs, like we just talked about? Now that we know what your approach is and what you're thinking of, and is this the format, or are we going down to another, like a convention center where people can come around? It has to be recorded, I'm assuming. 'cause it's a
We
quorum.
actually did in the convention center. That's
You
how
need
we
a
sort of
quorum, so it
ran.
has to be recorded because of your open government policy, I assume?
That's open to question, how it has to be documented.
Yep.
Because obviously, when we did it before, we didn't have TV, we didn't need this format.
Right.
And so we sort of have to decide on that.
Okay, we'll take a crack at that and get it back to you. Then our focus will be on the survey. Then we'll take a crack at the left side, prioritize some to see where we can capture, and try to stay away from the questions we already want people to answer in here, but have the dialogue with the,
Are we thinking we would have a first workshop in June?
I'm, maybe the end of June if we can.
End
get
of
the
June?
workload. Maybe. We have to advertise it, we have to put the flyers out, and I would assume when we advertise for it, we want to put all the workshops out there in one advertisement. Or some of them, at least get you a little further out.
In that case, we may be looking at having more than one a month to capture the time that
Yep.
that people are here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just takes a while to launch. It's not just about having it and putting it out there 7 days in advance.
No, we understand.
Yeah,
We
and if we
understand.
can do at least maybe capture the first 3 workshops in a flyer, we're not doing it, because we know they might change on the end. That word didn't work, so we're gonna try something different on the back.
Yeah, I think one of the things that concerns us is that we know that we believe that the 3 months over the summer are very, very critical, because that's when a lot of the people that
Right.
have a vested interest in the city are going to be here.
We agree with you on that completely, which is, we know the schedule because it was in January where we needed to start this. So now we're asking to be expedite this for the next 2 months, and that's something
Right.
we have to deal with on our schedule. That's something I have to talk about in the scope and the budget, so. I'm not saying we can or can't do it, but you're asking us to do something in 60 days when, under 60 days, and get it advertised in the next 30 probably, so
Okay, good,
we'll get back with you on that.
good.
Oh,
How
2
about
minutes to
that?
spare.
Minutes to go.
Thank you very much. We're really enjoying, I have to let you know that, the meetings were long last time. We're enjoying dialogue from everybody. We've had everybody speak, everybody on the panel. We're enjoying the dialogue because we're learning a little bit more about each person, of how we can make sure all the needs are being met as well. So, thank you for all the input.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we will continue with the rest of our meeting. reconvene. And note that Mr. Mandelos has joined us. Thank you. What we have is for the rest of the topics, more our update information, so we'll cover these one at a time. The first being really an update for the rest of the Planning Commission on the status of the ClearSpace project. You'll recall that several weeks ago, we prepared, or we discussed for first 4 hours and 2 hours, and then another 4 hours, our recommendations. We formatted that recommendation in a report to the commissioners and submitted it for their
April 24th.
April 24th, thank you, meeting. And the summary was that, just for everybody to recall, that our recommendation was to not change the code with a classification of a performing arts center, and that we suggested, we went further in the report, and we suggested a number of alternative things that could be considered to help ClearSpace get back on track. We also noted that at that time of our meeting, just before the meeting, we received several pieces of information which were really not included in our discussion because we really didn't have time to discuss them. One of them was a question that had been raised relative to the amount of square footage impacting, if you like, the FAR for ClearSpace. There was we questioned whether it was just a misprint or a difference in interpretation, and the building inspector went back to ClearSpace and gave us their interpretation, and I believe that the city's interpretation was somewhat different, so that the actual numbers that had been used to calculate the FAR and the available area usage in the building was different than we had been discussing. So that was one issue. There was, the other thing was that there was a proposal, which at the time we did not discuss. There was a proposal set forth that had been created for the commissioners, apparently, by the solicitor, that would have, that was on their agenda, by the way, for that day, which would have caused a discussion of whether there would be an ordinance change that would describe a performing arts center and associated parking relief. And at their meeting, at that meeting on the 24th, which there was an interaction between myself and the commissioners describing our report, which ultimately they did not follow up at that meeting on the proposed ordinance change, basically either tabled it or eliminated it, did not discuss it further. So that's sort of where we are. ClearSpace has not come back to us and been asked to be put on the agenda again, okay? So the city, the commissioners have our report relative to our recommendation. They have not acted any further on it, except that there was, at the meeting last week, there was an agenda item on the 6th, I'm sorry. On the 6th, there was an agenda item on their agenda to discuss ClearSpace and other projects, and the mayor informed us, or informed the commissioners, that the night before, so I guess on the evening of the 5th, ClearSpace had contacted him and asked that ClearSpace be removed from the agenda, which he did. So there was basically no discussion of ClearSpace, although it had originally appeared as an agenda item. So that's sort of where we are. And Dom, anything that you have to report?
I have not received any submissions
Yeah.
Since the
So,
last presentation here.
they're probably thinking, okay? They're reacting to our report, I'm sure. And they're thinking, and they're probably studying, they may be studying some of the suggestions that we had in our report. They know that there was a difference in area calculations. So what they're doing about that, don't know. That's all I have to report on clear space at this point in time. So, anything else?
I have a couple things I want to add, but I don't have to go first.
Okay. Anyone else? That's sort of where we are.
So there's no further action.
At this present time, my understanding, there's no further action. Okay?
One of the things, I actually brought this along, because we had this at the table at the last meeting, but our charge was to talk about the parking, and so we weren't focused on, and this is the new information that basically, in my mind, changes everything, but we as a group, never got a chance to talk about it. David included it parenthetically in the report at the very end, just saying that new information that we received puts them, between 4582 and 7206 square feet over the 30,000 FAR. And there's actually reason to believe that the third floor had a problem as well. So, all the communication throughout the whole process, we were talking about parking, was that it was a 25,000 square foot building, and it's not. It ended up being, 37, possibly even 42. And given that, they were going to have to, the size of the building has been the problem all along, basically. And we wouldn't have, if we had been focused on that rather than the parking, we would have gotten a lot further a lot sooner. So that new information really kind of made a lot of things moot in a way. But we didn't have it until that meeting.
So that's where it is right now. No new information. Okay? So moving on, if there's no more questions on that. I received, or the Planning Commission has received a couple of emails from citizens, basically from Solar 3, related to the Rehoboth Auto Repair construction project out on Coastal Highway. If anybody has been driving down the Forgotten Mile, you know that about a month or so ago, there was a big tear down of that piece of property. That's on the corner of Baymart, or the entrance to Baymart. And what has followed is a significant amount of construction or reconstruction of new buildings on the property. So when we received this letter from Solar 3 that questioned, basically it was questioning what was going on the property, I went to the building inspector and sort of asked him what's going on. I mean, I saw what was going on, but officially what's going on. And he informed me that yes, there are changes that are taking place there. And he assured me that at that time that all of the I's and the T's had been crossed and the I's had been dotted in terms of issuing permits. And of course, for something like that, probably Sussex County Conservation District. Conservation District has to be involved. The state fire department has to be involved, among other things. So the real question was, which I posed to Dom, and because I didn't know, and we didn't really have any drawings, was this was something that just came through building and licensing as a normal application, or was it something that could have qualified for a site plan review? And he responded to me that, in his opinion, it did not qualify for the site plan review, and we can discuss that or what have you. But basically, what has come out as he's furnished all the information, and hopefully that can be conveyed or is available now to the people that wrote the emails questioning what was going on, is that it would appear that all of the proper forms have been basically secured and before the building permit was allowed, et cetera, and it's under construction. We can argue, and we'll talk offline about the criteria that qualifies something for a site plan review or not a site plan review, but in building and licensing's position is that it didn't qualify for a site plan review. Is that a fair?
That's correct, sir.
Yep. So we have a picture, I guess. Some pictures were submitted to us. Might as well share it with you. Hang on for a second. Oh, and we've got a code of 1189. And there we go. Pardon me, hang on, bear with me. If I can find it. If I can find it. Camera. Let me look for it differently. There we go. Okay. So anybody that's been familiar with this is one of the original buildings. There was another building back here that was torn down. And so this new building, which has sort of the blue top, the gray bottom, has been built. And then there is a second building that is being built in the front on the lot. And the question was impervious surface. All of the surfaces were impervious before. They remain essentially impervious, I guess. There was a question of the runoff on the site, and I believe the city took a look at that. I think Kevin, did you do that, Dom, or did Kevin?
Kevin.
I think Kevin did it and confirmed that the runoffs in part go to the county sewer, I think on Route 1, and also to the, ultimately to the city sewer. Part of the runoff goes to the city sewer on I guess it's Stokely, probably Stokely Street Extension. Is that? Scarborough. Scarborough, I'm sorry, Scarborough Extended. So Dom has issued or made available to us all of the approved what do you call them?
The reviews by the state. And
Reviews by the
calculations-
state, the county.
calculations related to the
Yeah.
project.
So it's progressing. That's it. And hopefully they'll be back in business, or they are in business currently. So, yeah, we'll get to that. So I just wanted to bring you up to date. And ordinarily, we probably wouldn't have said anything except that we received a letter that basically from Solar 3 that questioned the validity, if you like, of the construction that was going on. And since we didn't know, we asked Dom, and Building and Licenses has responded to us. So, yeah, there is correspondence. One of them.
Relative to clear space.
Yeah, that's clear space, I'm sorry. There was, we can
wanna
come
go
back to that.
Yeah,
Let's go back to that.
We'll go back to
afterwards.
that.
Yeah.
But
Good on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, but we will get back to that. So that's where we are. We'll open it up to the, you,
My name is Jim LaShora.
and you issued the email.
Yeah, I've been, I guess, you know.
And your address, Jim?
1026 Scarborough Avenue Extended.
Thank you.
So we bought our property from, having that picture up again would really help. Yeah, if you have access to the picture to put it up again, that it would be helpful, I guess, to, you know, give us something to look at. But we purchased our property from Roger Truitt. It's not actually in the Truitt's Choice subdivision, but the deep long lot, the first one on Scarborough Extended,
Yep.
past, you know.
One of two lots that
were
were,
subdivided. So,
Yep.
so the two next to us were kind of subdivided into three, and they extend into kind of his original property, which got narrowed, and those. So there are four that are next to us that are kind of part of that subdivision, and then we're the deep long one next to it. So the property that Rehoboth Auto is currently using as their office is his original home, and it's zone C3. And so they're using that as their, you know, office, auto repair shop, you know, kind of central headquarters now in C3 zoning, which backs up to us. And then they've been renovating their C1 property behind us, which doesn't come all the way to us. One of those, you know, beach walk entrance aisles goes in between us and them. So, you know, the Ocean Bay Mart or Beach Walk property surrounds them on three sides. They have Route 1 on the other. And their history is, well, it used to be an Amoco station. There were underground storage tanks. You know, they had testing done in 2007 by DENREC, and they cleared the diesel, and they cleared the, you know, premium tank, and they cleared the regular gas tank, and they, you know, did the readings for lead and the gasoline additives and all of that stuff that everybody is panicky about, you know, with groundwater contamination. And, you know, they said there's no harm here, you know, you're good to go. So, you know, I don't know how many feet down they are for these huge tanks. They fill everything in. They cover it all back up with impervious surfaces, and they shed it off to, you know, Ocean Bay Mart and to Route 1 again. And then, you know, they apply, I guess a year or two ago, I'm not sure exactly when they put in their application for this reconstruction. You know, the Rehoboth Auto, we know because we live there, they use a lot of the vacant space at Ocean Bay Mart. You know, what used to be shopping centers or other buildings for other things are now kind of garages for Rehoboth Auto, and they do the repair work back there. They're going to be losing that at some point, so they, I think, needed to expand. This is my sense. I kind of gather this from the ether as much as anything. But my sense is, you know, they needed to make sure they, you know, can continue to do their work. So they're expanding. And when the permits were done, you know, Sussex Conservation District has provisions if it's under an acre, if they're not increasing their impermeable area, you know, if it's consistent with their prior plan. Apparently here there wasn't really a prior plan, but, you know, they just shed everything to the surrounding properties. That's okay. You know, unfortunately for us, you know, they shed it to surrounding properties before, but a lot more of it comes to us now. The buildings are much larger. The contour is different, just mostly, I think, probably because of the beach walk plans and what is going to be happening there. They needed to build up, or felt like they did, and so they did. And so, you know, more comes toward us. And we also have potential concerns with the C3 property, which we think could, our observation is, there's a lot less space for cars that are getting dropped off and picked up. You know, now they've built out their site with a lot of garage bays and very little ability to park anything that's getting left for repairs or that's waiting for somebody to come pick it up. And my sense is it's likely they will buy the lot, the C3 lot that they're now using as their office, and what will they do with it? They'll probably pave that. You know, that's a guess. I mean, I don't know, but that's my fear and my guess. So when building and licensing approved this, and Sussex Conservation approved it with no on-site stormwater, you know, as they're putting in the gravel, I mean, I used to work in the paving, issuing patents and paving at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, so I'm somewhat familiar with what they were doing. And I went back and I said, aren't you doing any underground stormwater management? And they said no. So I got in touch with Sally Foreman, and I, said, the stuff from Scarborough drains straight into the lake. A lot of this comes to us, by way of Route 1 and into our street. And my neighbors are here, and it comes into Paul and Bonnie's yard. It comes into Jackie and John's yard. Leroy there maintains the rain gardens on our street that try to take up the extra, but they're over capacity. I mean, they don't really do it. And now we've got, used to be just a house, I guess, on our lot in the, and Roger's original house, but now there's like 3 other new ones there. So, we have a lot more properties. There used to be a lot of open space for this stuff to drain to, and it's not there. But the thing that I think really concerns me is I don't think a building permit has issued, and that it cannot, because there is a city code provision, 236-30, that says no building permit shall be issued for any project or projects that individually or collectively involve. And number 2 is the development or redevelopment of a parcel of land or adjacent parcel of land in excess of 20,000 square feet. And when I look at the map on the site, that's available, I didn't pay to have a survey done, but when I do the calculations, it is clearly over 20,000 square feet. And then the lot next to it that they're using is 11,000 square feet. So we're dealing with, 31,000 plus potential impermeable surface draining onto our couple little yards there that are already, built to capacity because they're new homes built, to the green space and FAR, and they've been built recently. So my concern is now, what do we do? They're big buildings. There's a lot of issues, potential, and we know that we have issues with the stormwater management. There may be other issues with signage or lighting or size of the structures, location of the structures. My concerns are, what do we do from here? Legally, there's no building permit. Where are we, as far as any kind of recourse, if there is something that should have been done differently or should be done differently from here moving forward? Those are my concerns. Thank you.
Anybody else from the audience? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Bonnie Hardy. I'm at 1024 Scarborough Avenue Extended. I'm Jim's neighbor. We've owned our property since '94, so, and we have also 1022, which is a vacant lot right next to it. I have complained years ago about the runoff from Ocean Bay Mart onto our property and our vacant lot. It gets flooded all the time. And last year when we had a big rain, I just watched all the water come down off their buildings, coming right down into our yard. So there is a problem here with the runoff, and I guess our concern is stormwater management. Now yesterday we had Jessica Watson come over, and I thought maybe they do stormwater complaints, they try to help you. But what she told me is that since they are grandfathered, I guess stormwater came into effect in '91, and since they are grandfathered now, there's really nothing they can make them do. So we're trying to figure out what can we do, now to take care of this runoff water. I think if Beach Walk ever comes to fruition, maybe from what we've been told, that will take care of all the problems. However, who knows what's going to happen there? And I think now with Rehoboth Auto, the contour of the land is, they're higher ground than we are. So naturally, there used to be a blacktop curb that would maybe stop it, but now it's been worn down since the auto dealer has run over that. So it does come down into our property. So we are flooded there. And we're working with an engineer, with Pannoni, Alan, I forget his last name. He's looking at the drains because they do have 2 catch basins right in front kind of our house that they put in, but we need to know where they flow. Also, it doesn't really look like there's any catch basin at the street at Rehoboth Auto in the front. There is one very far away. There's nothing close by that would catch that water. So maybe that water is all running down, coming down Scarborough Avenue, and then we're catching it not only in the back, but we're getting it in the front. So my whole thing is, I think we need to look at this stormwater, and I don't know if there is something that when people go to develop things, the stormwater is looked at, because this water is a problem. So for us, if we want to develop our lot, we're going to have to address all this water that's coming into our property. And it's really, from what I understand, Ocean Bay Mart came into they were developed after where we live. Our Truett development that was there on Scarborough Avenue, that came first. They came after that. So they're grandfathered, but why? Because technically, the development there was first. So I think we need, I don't know what the city does for stormwater. The county, Jessica Watson is county. We are in the city limits too. And is there something that the town of Rehoboth or the city of Rehoboth can address with stormwater management to help people in our situation here on that? So.
Thank you.
Right.
Anybody else?
We'll close the comments from the public. Because this did not come before us as a site plan, there's not much.
Well, I think,
Dom?
Dom, there is a building permit, is that correct?
There is a building
There
permit.
is a building
Oh, yeah,
permit.
yeah.
It was-
We're under the
yes, it was
impression that there
issued.
was not.
It was issued March 3rd, 2019.
Or, yeah.
It's very timely for the CDP, though.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was going to talk about that, but yeah. Okay.
My point on that was, the code says that it's not a building permit unless a site plan has been reviewed and finally approved for such project by the Planning Commission. So it's a legal question whether it is a valid building permit or an invalid building permit or a building permit or not a building permit. That's a legal question.
Glenn, you want to comment on that at all?
Where do you go from here?
Yeah.
Well, you are the planning body, you're going through a CDP process now. You certainly can make recommendations to the commissioners through the CDP program or outside of it as to, the provision within the site plan review that designates what comes before this body for site plan review. You could certainly revise that because Dom and I spoke about this project and the way it was interpreted, and I certainly see the way he interprets it. I could also see it being interpreted as if it's greater than 40,000 square feet, it comes here, or 20,000 square feet, it comes here. So maybe some clarity would help.
Well, it is slightly over 20,000. It's 20,400, and I have confirmed that what is on the drawing that was furnished is the same number. So the 20,435 or whatever it is appears to be the right number. So it's, I don't know how to respond other than the interpretation for whatever reason was that it should not come as a site plan review. And if we have a problem, obviously, if there literally is a problem, it would seem to me, whether there was a site plan review or not a site plan review, it's a problem that ultimately the city needs to work with the residents about. If you know, if there's runoff being created that isn't being handled properly. So I don't know what to do about it.
Right, and I don't know if Public Works has looked at that area based upon the letters and comments.
Well, they looked at it last week and determined that the location in the direction that the runoff was taking place. I do not know if there's any future projects to address runoff by the city at this point.
Yeah.
You know, just in general, in some sort of coincidental things, I actually met Jessica Watson at a symposium in Lewis about 2 months ago, and she spoke, it was a water symposium, but she spoke specifically on their regulations and made it very clear during her talk that any lot over 5,000 square feet must have a plan from the Sussex County Conservation District, and it wasn't clear, you know, the criteria, and it wasn't clear that we always do that. And I've had a follow-up conversation with her with a view toward bringing her to speak to us for two reasons. One is, how do we incorporate the regulations that they're requiring of larger developments into our site plan review process? In other words, and Dave and I have talked about this because he says that they don't usually get into it till fairly late in the game, which, you know, could be a problem if you find something you want to change and you're already down the road in site plan review. So I wanted to learn about their process, and for both, you know, what we should be doing here for, you know, as a single lot policy, since most of them are 5,000 square feet or more, and what we should be doing for, especially for larger projects. And so she's on board to do that. And I figured that with the, you know, with the CDP and talking about stormwater management as part of that, that's the time to bring her in. So that's why she hasn't been here yet. At the same time, there are other initiatives going on within the city, especially this Resilient Communities project, which I think is really a neat project. It has a fairly short time horizon. They started in March. They're supposed to be finished in September. It involves a number of different communities, but from what I understand, they're going to provide data on the amount of impervious surface that's increased in the last, 15 years. So the amount from 2000, early 2000s to the present. And it would be really interesting to see that and just how much more impervious surface we have in the city today. And then out of their report is supposed to be a summary of mitigation options to increase stormwater infiltration, and also developing model ordinances to control impervious surface coverage. So I do think that going forward, we have to address this in the CDP and possible ordinances. It seems like to me that the Rehoboth Auto situation has identified a problem that we need to address citywide. Yeah, and that's kind of my take on it. So I'm glad to know about it, from that perspective. I don't know if that provides any comfort to people there now, but
Yeah.
but that's. Yeah.
These
I
things
know.
and to do it after the fact.
Right.
Because, you have all your equipment there, there's certain things you can do, and it's probably not that difficult, really,
Right, yeah. So, like I said, it was just sort of a coincidence that we were dealing with it with other issues, but yeah.
I mean, it's truly not an issue before us. The only reason we're responding today in the manner we did was because of a letter that was submitted to us, but it basically was not submitted to us as a site plan review. So.
I guess as from my standpoint as a commission, I'd like to understand better what the interpretation was by building and licensing that reached the conclusion that it didn't have to come before the Planning Commission.
I think building and licensing's view was that because the actual redevelopment was less than 20,000 square feet, although the lot was greater than 20,000 square feet, because the development, if I'm right, was less than 20,000 square feet, it didn't need to come before the Planning Commission for site plan review. When Susan was talking about conservation district, I've seen projects there where the lot size is 10 or 15,000 square feet, but the disturbance is less than 5,000 square feet, and that doesn't go before conservation district. So there's a little bit of an analogy there. I think again, the interpretation of the provisions that make a project either applicable, makes site plan review applicable or not applicable. Those provisions are probably what needs to be looked at, because the building and licensing looked at it and said that redevelopment isn't more than 20,000 square feet, so it doesn't go. But others could look at it and say, but the lot is more than 20,000 square feet, so it should have went. So, to me, that.
Well, but I would also point out, Glenn, as I did to Dom, and I believe Sharon was here, and I pointed out to her that item 5 under whatever it is, 236, whatever that ordinance number is, item 5 there is sort of a catch-all, is that any project that the building inspector believes should come for consideration, whether it's 20,000 square feet or not 20,000 square feet. And this is not an issue really with Dom. I mean, this goes back to Terry. When Terry was the building inspector, there were times when the interpretation, if you like, of the code was iffy, if you like, but there was a sense that if I could get some other input, it might be helpful. And that's why item 5 was put in there. And I would just say that maybe that should be executed. Maybe it needs to be reworded in some better way.
Yeah, that number 5, sir, I mean, I was around when it was
You
being developed,
helped
and-
draft that.
Yeah, and that was certainly the reason for number 5. If the building official sort of got the sense that this is a unique project, something that
Yeah.
should have some additional oversight, that provision is there for that reason.
Yeah. So, don't know what to do about it now.
I need a little help here. Are you saying that the site plan review criteria do not apply to this policy? To this?
I don't know. I know, I know the determination that the building official made, and my view is that if two people can look at an ordinance and wind up with two different spots, we should probably look at the ordinance to make sure that there's some clarity going forward. The provision says, so the 23630, one of the provisions that would send a project to site plan review before the planning commission is if the development or redevelopment of a parcel of land or adjacent parcel of land is in excess of 20,000 square feet. So one person could read that and say, so long as the land is in excess of 20,000 square feet, it should come before you. But I could imagine a project where somebody comes to the building official and says, I have a 20,000 square foot or 25,000 square foot parcel. I have a small 100 square foot shed in the back. I'd like to have that shed. I'd like to put some new siding on the shed. Dom's office would say, fine, here's the building permit. But somebody else could read that and say, but the lot's more than 20,000 square feet. Shouldn't that shed project come before the planning commission on a site plan review? So my point is that is what makes a provision unclear. Because I think you all would say, no, we don't exist as a planning commission to review 100 square.
Shouldn't we be asked the question based on the wording that's in the ordinance? In other words, whose option is it?
Don't misunderstand. There is an option number 5 that whenever a project comes in that looks a little, not suspicious, but looks like something that is of a certain magnitude that is worthy of the planning commission's review, there is an opportunity for the building and licensing department, whether the lot's 20,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet, frankly, for them to send it to you. So in this instance, it did not get sent.
A judgment issue.
Well, I think at the very least, we really ought to think about suggesting clarifying the code provision. Cases are won and lost on a comma now and then, and
That's true.
this may well be one of those cases.
So, I mean, the state code certainly gives you all the ability as planners to, when you think there's a code provision that's within your bailiwick to offer some recommendations to the commissioners for changes, you're able to do that. I mean, you could make that an agenda topic and talk through site plan review and make a recommendation. It's not gonna fix anything that's occurred at this site, but as you say, going forward, it would clarify some things.
An agenda item.
We can put that on as a discussion on the agenda. I mean, I recognize that this is sort of in that borderline area of interpretation. I perhaps would have interpreted it differently, but I think your example, you know, of the small shed on a lot, clearly probably doesn't warrant, you know, the site plan review. So it's an interpretation area. So I don't think it, well, I can't make a judgment. We have a valid building permit.
Right.
Okay, and I don't think it invalidates the building permit. I think one of the questions that I certainly would have asked the Conservation District, because we've had this problem before, is what rules are you applying? We know that the rules changed about, what, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and when I read their letter of compliance, it wasn't clear that they just rubber stamped it or whether they actually reconsidered it and said, oh, okay, nothing has changed. It wasn't clear to me. And what rules apply.
Right.
And you know, so perhaps if it had come, perhaps as a site plan review, perhaps we would have queried a little deeper with the Conservation District. You know, we've had problems with the Conservation District before. I don't want to say problems, but in general, they tend to not even want to look at a design until the design is essentially complete. We ran into that problem with Oak Grove because their standard response is, if you are doing something that's changing the topography of the lot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, from what it's been, we want to know what it's going to end up being. So you sort of, they're one of the last people you go to for approval. And at that point in time, it really is it's almost a penalty in a sense, because you put all this effort into the project and to get to the point of them even considering what you're doing. And so that poses a problem.
And I thought one of the purposes of site plan review is to deal with gray areas, you know, that aren't covered by another regulation. So
I guess another question that I have is, you know, looking at this as part of our CDP considerations, you know, is all well and good, but it doesn't help the people who are suffering from this situation. Glenn, maybe you can answer this question. Is there any other authority that the city has to ask the property owner to mitigate the water runoff that's damaging other people's property? I know it's after the fact of a building permit, but are there any enforcement authorities?
Right, I mean, I think they understand. So Dom's just commenting that the runoff, as he sees it, and I haven't been to the site, but as he sees it, the runoff is occurring because of the beach walk property, not because of the.
It wasn't the area that's been, for which the permit was issued. So it's the roadway that abuts the property owners. And I had that conversation with the auto repair. I had this conversation with the engineer, and especially the engineer reaffirmed that there's no runoff from their properties affecting the adjacent neighbors, but there is runoff from the beach walk property, of which is not leased by the auto repair operation.
So you're saying this project does not increase the runoff onto the neighbor's property?
All they're saying, I'm reiterating what the engineers for the site have indicated to me, that based on their calculations, the runoff has not increased more or contributed more to what is existing right now. And I just want to say, I invited them here to make a presentation as well. and they would have waited to see what came out of this discussion.
I had a question. Glenn, what is, in a normal course of event, what is a property owner's remedy if they don't agree with a building permit that's issued next door to them or wherever? Because we all know that our poor code is just full of vague language that leads itself to different interpretations of,
The general rule
of
is,
things.
and-
Is it a Board of Adjustment
Yeah, the
question, or is it a?
The general rule, and just to be clear, I'm not giving anybody here legal advice or ways to challenge a validly issued permit from our building official, but the normal course would be to appeal the decision of the building official to the Board of Adjustment. I think is it 20 days or 30 days from the 30 days from the issuance, and then the
30 days from the issuance.
From the issuance of the-
Basically, that's opportunity.
that administrative remedy is probably not available at this point. So you would take that administrative remedy to the Board of Adjustment, they'd make a decision one way or the other. If the board agreed with the issuance of the permit, then the next step would be an appeal to Superior Court, which would hear the appeal. Having missed that administrative remedy, it's always a question about, as a lawyer, it's always a question about whether you try to get to Superior Court somehow, because oftentimes Superior Court will say you had an administrative remedy, you missed it, and so you cannot now take it to Superior Court. Those are two options now. Of course, there could always be a private right of action between neighbors for water coming onto your lot is a trespass. I think there is a state statute that prohibits one owner's runoff from going onto another owner's lot. So there are all those sorts of private actions that can be taken as well.
But at this point, the Planning Commission really doesn't have any purview over the issue.
You really don't. I mean, I think it's healthy to have the discussion, but there's really nothing. I'm just being candid. There's nothing that this body can do that will provide relief.
Mr. Bechtel?
Mark Betchko, 98 Sussex Street. I just want to ask a question. How would a property owner adjacent to a project know that a building permit has been issued? I, having built in the city, I know I post my permit at the property, but is there any notification, any other way that a permit has been requested?
I mean, there is a posting. Once you're issued a permit, you're required to post the property.
You're
with the
required to post
permit.
it on the site.
Yeah.
Visibly on the site.
But beyond that,
Is it on the website?
I'm sorry.
Is the issuance of a building permit on the website? I know it.
I don't think so. And I want to go back to the debates everyone was having when we were having the quote, the mini hotels popping up, and how the city was changing. And at that time, I noticed that there's no information system for building permits. There's no place you can go on the city's website and see what building permits have been issued where. And so nobody knows at any time what's going on in the totality of the city. And it would be nice if in your planning forward that the city portal would have a place for the following permits are in review or have been issued so that everybody would know what's being built where. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that building permits have to be posted until you're actually going to begin construction pursuit. My understanding is that a building permit doesn't need to be posted on the property until such time as you're actually going to begin your construction project.
What is
There's a time limit within which you have to start your construction.
Right.
But that is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's usually 60 days after the issuance
You have 60 days
to begin,
well, you have up to 6 months to commence.
or 6
then
months to commence.
to-
So then if you don't have to post it before you commence and you have 6 months, then no one's going to have knowledge in order to take advantage of the administrative remedy.
Yeah, I think the board has, under their bylaws, discretion to go beyond those 30 days for good cause or something, so that you could probably make an argument that the discovery rule applies, meaning that the 30 days doesn't start working until you've discovered that the building permit has been issued. Could be. But as Don was just commenting, I asked him that they've issued more than 1,000 building permits already this year. So, shoving them onto the portal and just a big long list, I'm not sure if that would be entirely helpful, any more helpful than a sign on the property that as you're driving by, you see it.
But is there one posted?
Yes, there is one posted, and I'm saying, in responding to the complaints that were forwarded to me, I went, this is the opportunity I had and visited the site for when the operator was there, and we had a discussion, and the permits were originally posted on the hangar doors, but because they were raised, they would not be visible. And then they put it on the outside of the door to access the building, the remaining building, and they started to get water damage, so they kept the door closed and posted the permits on the inside of the door. So I indicated to them that they had to take steps to post those outside and protect them as well.
This issue came up not relative to building permits, but extensive discussion relative to tree removal permits, and it went on is what is the appropriate time to post it and give people, neighbors, and it is a problem. I mean, it's fundamentally a problem.
But, taking into consideration Mr. Perry, what he has observed, you don't have to post until you begin your work.
Yeah.
So, you could play the zoning game, as I would call it, is don't post until the 30 days have elapsed, and then it goes back to the discovery matter that Glenn was talking about. And I saw a lot of that in Philadelphia.
It's perhaps something we need to look at relative to the code.
And we do notify for demolition, I believe. I know.
Yes,
I
there
know,
was a-
I've received notice from
That's-
neighborhood
demolition.
That's
demolition.
the point I wanted to make is Dom did send out a notice about the demolition for the structure they took down. We received that notice. I sent all of you a copy of it. I sent a copy of the demolition permit. So we were aware there was an application for demolition. We were aware there was a permit for demolition. We would have thought there would have been some kind of a notice of an application or a process. We get letters from the Planning Commission about the school. We get letters from the Planning Commission about Beach Walk. Certainly, this one right behind us on two sides of the corner of our lot, we would get some kind of notification. So we received the notifications on the demolition. We heard when they were going to build something new. We thought there would be more notification. Yeah, there's sort of a disconnect there. It's inconsistent with the other. I mean, we love the notifications. We love the letters about the school. We love the letters about Beach Walk. We were happy to hear about the demolition, but we thought we'd hear something about
Well, it's
what
something
they
that
were
we'll
actually
have to
doing.
take under
Yeah.
consideration. Thank you.
I have a personal concern on this, why I stayed for this part of the meeting, is I could foresee that the clear space site, they could design a 14,999 square foot theater on lots A and B, and lot C put a 3,000 square foot office complex, rehearsal and classroom space, and that would not go to site review?
Well, it's another one that arguably
That's
would
a
not
free-
have to.
Yeah,
would allow it
there's
to.
item
But I
5
wouldn't
in the
know.
code. We're not talking about clear space
Right.
now, but it's a
There's also
generic question.
Item 3 about substantial,
Yeah.
substantial.
But I might not
Uh,
know
ju-
that
Just
that
let
was
me
going to
read or
happen.
reread
Yeah.
item,
Please, yeah.
I'll read them all, just so everybody understands. This is 23630, and it's the requirements for a site plan review by the Planning Commission are to be found under section 23630, site plan required purpose consideration, specifically 236-30A prohibits issuing a building permit for any project or projects that individually or collectively involve. And then there are 5 things. The first is 4 or more dwelling units. The second is the development or redevelopment of a parcel of land or adjacent parcel of land in excess of 20,000 square feet. The third is a commercial project over 15,000 square feet of gross floor area, or which requires substantial renovation or increase in intensity of usage. 4 is the development requiring a change in zoning. And 5 is, quote, the catch-all, in any other site plan referred to the Planning Commission by the building inspector until a site plan has been reviewed and finally approved for such project by the Planning Commission. So it's a catch-all that allows the building and licensing in areas which to them, by their interpretation, may be gray and maybe not code-specific. It allows them to pass it on to the Planning Commission.
Well, it seems the out there is the or in item 3, and it's left to the Building and License Department, and there should be some sort of information to the residents that they have 30 days to
Appeal.
Thank you.
Okay, we hear you. Okay. Enough said? On this one? Yeah,
One more, I'm new, I've only lived on Scarborough. for-
Name, please.
John
Name?
Wildfong, 1025 Scarborough, so I'm across the street from Terry. I've only been there for about a year and a half. I know that since the project has begun, I've got quite a bit more, water on my property. I've had my pool overflow and have mud go into it. Now, I have no idea, school's on one side, auto body's on the other. I just know that and when I just can't, after you read the criteria there, and then you look at what they're doing over there, I don't understand how that couldn't possibly require a site plan. That is a major project. And oh, by the way, they've accelerated it significantly since it's come before you guys. So that's really all I have to say. I just find it perplexing that after you read through that anybody could interpret that as not requiring a site plan.
Okay, thank you. Move on. Let me just drop back to clear space.
Yeah.
Just to note that there were a number of correspondences. We've said this before, that all correspondence now submitted to the city secretary are attached to the minutes, or I'm sorry, to the agenda in the meeting agendas that are posted on the city website. So we have sort of taken not to necessarily read them into the record because they are there for the public record on the website. But I'll just mention that we had several from Mark Betchkel, a number that related to FOIA requests that had been submitted and information that related to clear space. So it should be listed on the website. Is that right, Ann? Not yet, but it will be. Okay, so I don't think we have to read these into the record. Okay?
Seat.
Yep. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry is representing the Planning Commission on a garage task force, which may or may not have met. I don't know if you've met. You have?
Yes, we did. We had.
Have you got anything good to tell us?
Well, I guess the good thing is that we had our first kickoff meeting of the parking garage task force on last Friday at 10 o'clock on June the 3rd, or May the 3rd, rather. And it was really just a kickoff meeting. I mean, I can't say that there was anything in-depth that arose from that other than to have some general discussion about issues that relate to, the possibility of building a parking garage in the city. Linda Kaufman was very helpful in that she has experience with these types of projects. And she also happens to have known for a long time the people that are affiliated with Colonial Parking, which has been the company, along with Edis, who made the proposal to the city that, is currently sort of on the table for discussion by the Parking Garage Task Force. I think that one thing of note that was very clear that the members of the task force felt very strongly about was that, assuming that the city moves forward with a parking garage project, that it has to be done on a competitive basis. While the Colonial proposal is, very intriguing and provides for basically a joint partnership between Colonial, Edis, and the city, there are still questions, in terms of its execution, how it's going to work, what the financial impact on the city could be. Some members of the task force raised concerns about the fact that if there were an economic downturn, for example, and fewer people were coming to Rehoboth Beach and suddenly it became a white elephant that just sat there, or that Colonial and Edis walked away from the project and left the city with, now what do we do with this parking garage? The other issue that requires some further consideration that was identified was the fact that, at least as it was explained by Linda Kaufman, the city's equity in this project is the land. And it was suggested that the property itself would be collateral for the loan that Colonial and Edis would be taking out in order to construct the parking garage. That can be fairly problematic.
Yeah.
And so, and I've been talking with some real estate attorneys and real estate folks that I know, who have suggested to me that, it ought to be the lease that is the collateral, because Colonial and Edis, in this case, would be leasing the property from the city. And it should be the lease that would be collateral as, for part of the loan, and not the land itself. So that there are a lot of issues to be explored, but it was a good meeting, and I think we at least identified a number of topics that we need to dive into further. The next meeting of the task force is on Friday, June 7th at 10 a.m. Here in this room.
Okay. Thank you, Rick, for keeping us informed.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, yeah.
And I apologize, due to my health issues, I was never able to attend as a citizen any of the prior meetings, but I am exceedingly concerned about this, because it appears to be an assumption that this is the option, as opposed to a true analytic evaluation of what the parking possibilities are in Rehoboth Beach. And a foregone conclusion, and forgive me for being academic, but it seems to suffer from confirmation bias. The previous leader of the group is very knowledgeable in parking garages. And therein lies, I think, part of the rub, is the fact that a full evaluation of parking capability in various modes and forms was not done at all. And as you point out, Rick, this was a sales pitch. This isn't an analysis. It turns out also the analytics are wrong from the standpoint of the number of spaces, because it was done on total number of spaces, and the city already has a third of those spaces in existence. So the numbers are completely meaningless. As a planner, I am very concerned because insufficient analysis on a much larger perspective was done because it suffers from confirmation bias. I mean, all the letters that went into the coastal press and saying, oh, we're in favor of parking garage, parking garage. If this were 1980, it might make sense, but it's not. And if we're going to do something, we need to do it from the standpoint of a CDP perspective of what's appropriate for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, notwithstanding all the questions you've raised, which are completely appropriate. But what really concerns me is that it's focused in on a singularity, and there are many, many other options to be considered. And I throw out two, And I don't have any position either whether this is a good or bad idea. What I'm opposed to is the analytics and the methodology and the quantitative and qualitative approaches were not good from an academic perspective. Is for the sake of argument, if it takes 2 years to construct this, if we look at, for example, the property that's currently leased for the senior citizens, and you have to forgive me by stroke, I fall behind sometimes on certain knowledge. That particular area, even if the Anna Hazard Museum wasn't even touched, is a lot of parking area, and the city owns all of it. If they leave and they go out somewhere on Route 1, which they're planning to, and I don't know if that's still progressing. I've heard various rumors that it is, it isn't, it might, it may be. But if in fact it did, that would generate a tremendous amount of parking in a very strategic area. The other is, and no one's ever considered this when I looked at the things that have occurred before, is in the area of Duval Beach, which in Denmark, for example, and we've got this problem right now, and with sea level rise, we're going to have more of it. From the standpoint of that area of the beach, every time we get a major nor'easter, it erodes tremendously. And if we get a really bad one, it may wipe the whole area out even worse than it did a few years ago. One of the solutions is to put, as has been done in Denmark, an appropriately sized parking garage, which in fact you wouldn't see because it would be beneath, behind, and below the dune and also becomes a seawall. So I don't take a position on whether this is good, bad, or indifferent from the standpoint of should a garage be done. What I'm concerned is that nothing was done that really evaluated what was needed from a CDP perspective, parking within the city, and all of the options should be considered. This has been a very myopic perspective, and it bothers the hell out of me, quite frankly, as a planner.
Those are all very good points, Mike. I think it's fair to say that the parking garage task force, at least my perception is that it's open-minded. They've identified concerns even beyond what I briefly described. Economic impact for the city, impact on parking generally, traffic concerns, and a whole host of things. And so I don't believe that the parking garage task force is focused solely on whether or not a parking garage should be built where it's currently proposed by the Colonial Edis group. So I think that's one of the reasons why the task force was formed, was to consider all of those considerations that you've identified as well, and not take a myopic approach to the situation. I think the only thing that we are in general agreement on is that parking is a problem, and we have to find ways to address that. And maybe the parking garage is the answer, maybe something else is the answer. One of the questions that we raised, and we haven't seen it yet, but Linda Kaufman suggested that Colonial and Edis had done this, that they had done full scope analysis to address all of these areas of concern. It's something that we obviously want to have the task force take a look at as well. And so, your idea that Denmark uses is actually something that I hadn't thought of. Maybe that is an answer. Maybe that's something that should be considered. That, I think, would dovetail nicely into considerations of transportation within the city, a trolley bus or something to move people around. So I will certainly bring your thoughts back.
Well, I feel much better. Unfortunately, I had to rely on a lot of what I saw in print. And I was getting very concerned because it seemed to be a freight train that had left the station, was already going to a conclusion. And from a purely, and I said, I take no position on whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I just look at the analytics and the qualitative and the quantitative analysis. And I said, whoa, this is a sales pitch. And it seems like it's already decided. And then there was the Chamber of Commerce, everybody chiming in and said, oh, this is great. We really need it. Our job, my job, is to look from the longer perspective. And so I'm thrilled you're on the committee. And I'm sorry that I didn't get to any of the meetings because I couldn't.
That task force has just started.
Right, but there was the previous.
there was the previous
The previous one, which I couldn't get to for the same reasons.
I mean, and that brings up the point, at what point should this be part of the CDP process? I mean, it sort of is, and you're coming back to us, and
Well,
reporting
yeah.
and all that, but, I mean,
Well,
beyond that.
Okay, since you raised that, let me just raise a general concern that I have. I almost feel as though the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners are independently going off in the direction of, what's the city gonna be in 5 years? And where the two meet. I mean, I understand the need for the Board of Commissioners to plan ahead in order to, project, our financial needs, revenues and expenses, and a 5-year budgeting plan, which is important. By the same token, we're sitting here and we're putting in an enormous amount of time, and we'll be putting in even more as we, hold these workshops and everything else to develop the CDP. And the CDP is supposed to be the roadmap for the future of the city. And I'm a little bit concerned that one hand's getting ahead of the other hand, and we might not be able to make the two come together.
Almost this exact conversation took place at the commissioners' meeting earlier this week, where I think, I forgot who it was, raised the issue of the CDP going on and they're not having any input. And they all agreed that they were going to take the prior CDP home and read it and come back with some thoughts and somehow try to get together with the planning commission.
I feel like the straight man, on stage. That sort of leading into, I guess, a subject that I would address, okay, apropos of that. May I?
Please.
Did you finish your?
No,
are you
I'm full.
finished? If you look at the meeting that took place on Monday, the commissioners' meeting at 3 o'clock, and if you go to the 2-hour and 55-minute mark, okay, precisely, and you start to play that portion, which is very close to the end of the meeting, it starts off with Commissioner Mills actually questioning why ClearSpace was on the agenda. And the mayor then explained that ClearSpace was on the agenda not really to discuss ClearSpace per se, but as an example of one of several large projects that are before both the city and the Planning Commission in the future. And what took place, and then he pointed out that as we indicated before, that ClearSpace had requested to be removed from the agenda, so that was sort of off the agenda. He then, what then took place was an interchange between a number of the commissioners. Commissioner Calusi started with a discussion about mixed-use development and pointed out, and a number of people got involved. But the bottom line was the commissioners ultimately decided that in the future, and the future apparently is June 3rd, there will be a special workshop commissioners meeting, which will discuss aspects as felt by the commissioners related to the CDP, okay? At first glance, exactly the point that you raised before, Rick, is does the right hand know what the left hand is doing, and are they getting ahead of the game? I looked at that tape several times, okay, and I concluded after looking at the tape that, in fact, what the mayor ostensibly was doing is said, let's get our books in order. Here is the CDP. Here is the 2015 update. Read it, and from your perspective as a commissioner, are there things that you would like to see addressed in the new CDP? and that we can then communicate when we have a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. The way I read it was that it is recognized that the Planning Commission's responsibility is for the CDP. But I think what was being asked at that meeting, or for this meeting, was to let the commissioners take a look at the CDP and sort of individually and then collectively get their thoughts together and say, this is important to me, this is not important to me, or you know, and so that they can communicate that ultimately in a joint meeting, which we know we will have with the commissioners. So to that end, the mayor called me last night, okay, which I think is on the good side, and he explained what he was trying to do, and I'll take him at face value and say, we ought to go to that meeting and listen. As planning commissioners, it would be good to attend that meeting and listen, because my experience in the past is that sometimes they've been presented with the CDP, and then all of a sudden in sort of surprise, well, why didn't you consider this? Or why didn't you think about this? And this is sort of a way of getting everybody on board. They're one of a number of stakeholders, the major stakeholders being the public. So this meeting will, I believe, take place. Ann, is that correct? It's a placeholder now, and I don't think they've set an agenda, but the mayor, what actually took place in the discussion, if you look at the tape, was it was suggested that they set aside about a half an hour to discuss this. And Commissioner Schlosser basically said, come on, guys, we've done that before, and a half an hour doesn't get you anything, and we need deeper discussion, so that's why sort of the thought of doing it in a couple-hour period. And again, from their perspective. Okay, so, and Commissioner Calusi basically said, I don't want to come and read the report in a year from now and then say, why didn't you consider this? Why didn't you consider that? When these things are important to them as commissioners in doing the job that they're doing. So that's sort of the gist, I think, of this meeting that's coming up. I would urge all of us to attend it and listen. Okay, so it's not quite as bad as we might imagine. And the mayor did call me last night, and we talked about this. So,
You know,
You're not calling this a joint meeting, are you?
no, it is not a joint meeting. No, it is not a joint meeting, and
We're
the way it
spectators.
was voiced, if you look at the tape, the way it was voiced was let's get our act together before we go into a joint meeting, so that when we
We're
have,
sitting there.
yeah,
Okay.
so that when we have a joint meeting,
Okay.
we, you know, it's more productive, because they clearly admitted that they could come with 7 different opinions about the same subject.
Yeah.
You know, and
One of the, I'm glad to hear that. That's terrific. I think one of the things that's so important, and Glenn and I have had these discussions over the many years, and he incorporates it into the documents he creates for us, is it says that the comprehensive development plan has the force and effect of law, which has never been really implemented or utilized to any extent in any actions in Rehoboth Beach that I know of. It's very rarely ever brought to the fore. But my point is, and as we learned from when we went to the meeting up from the state of Delaware, is that we want to incorporate it into as an ordinance so that it does have a much more forceful effect, as we were advised, that it's much more useful if it becomes. And what it really, the real importance to it is, even though we have a massive book that this is that thick, is the CDP takes care of all the fuzzy stuff, which it turns out is the stuff that really matters and where all the problems are created. So I'm thrilled to hear that we're doing that. We're doing what we're doing, and we're going to make sure it does have the force and effect of law.
one thing that perhaps, I got to find it and then circulate it, is several years ago, when Brian Patterson was sitting on the Planning Commission, sort of out of nowhere, he wrote a small epic, number of pages, describing from a legal standpoint, he's a lawyer, from a legal standpoint, the words force of law and how it applies to the CDP. And I remember reading it, I think Dr. Littleton gave me a copy of it. I had never seen it. And I sort of turned to Brian and said, why haven't you said anything about this? But that was just his nature. He just sort of sat down and did it on his own with no real reason. It's probably something that all of us need to take a look at. I don't know if Ann has a copy of it or not.
That sounds great.
We can get it for Brian.
We certainly could get, I have a copy someplace, and I will find it. But what he did was he went through all of the legal cases relative to force of law. And of course, the courts have interpreted the meaning of force of law relative to the CDP differently. Okay, first of all, it's interpreted differently, I believe, Glenn, from a county standpoint versus a municipality standpoint.
Well, by state code, it's different. The state code actually provides in Title IX that as far as counties go, it's only the maps within the CDP that have the force of law. That's right. But for a municipal comprehensive development plan, the entire text, all the maps, the entire document is a force of law document.
Yeah, but in their wherever there's been decisions, though, they almost invariably so far have dealt with land issues as opposed to other planning issues.
Yes.
So the fact that we say everything that you write down as the force of law, that really hasn't been demonstrated in the courts completely yet.
Not outside of land use. I mean, there's a case in Kent County where the CDP previewed that a certain area would be zoned, so it was a map, and so it had the force of law. And a developer wanted to, and the Kent County local government, the levy court, did not take the necessary steps within 18 months to change their zoning designation to that which was anticipated under the CDP. Developer came and said, I'd like to have a permit to build consistent with the zoning that you've put into your CDP, but you have not yet adopted by a separate ordinance. And the county said no, and they went to court, and the court said, that map has the force of law. You effectively rezoned the property when you adopted the plan. So
whether you did it or not.
Right. Yeah. So it's an important document.
Yeah, and actually Vince Robertson used that argument when he went before the Board of Adjustment for the Baltimore Hotel.
Yeah, it's very easy to find words in the CDP that are consistent with what you're trying to do by just picking a few of them out.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because in that sense, it's got more gray areas than the code does.
Yeah.
Well, one thing we've done though in our CDP, if I remember correctly, we have language up front that basically says there's a lot of, what's the word? There's a lot of specific.
Would, should, and could.
Right, there's a lot of aspirational goals
Yeah,
within the plan.
right.
They
Yeah,
don't,
and we have to, right.
you're not under, the city's not under an obligation to, unless you all say, this is an action item, it should be done.
Yeah, but that's true, we say that, but in fact, the court's positions relative to force of law have come after we did the last CDP.
True.
So that really, this time through, we really have to be careful between will and would, could, or should.
Right, yeah, you've talked about that before.
Right, but one of the advantages is in the generality, not addressing that topic, you're absolutely correct, is from the standpoint of health and public safety.
Yep.
And the range of what that is based on the facts. And that's the thing that you really bring to the fore with the CDP that has such tremendous value and maybe even more valuable as we go forward with the stresses that are being put on Rehoboth Beach.
In the future.
In the future.
In the future. Okay, so we've covered those things. Glenn, you got anything else to tell us?
The only thing to mention is that the commissioners, you may know, they're considering an ordinance next week that deals with angle or perpendicular parking. I think they're considering converting, I think, some of the parking perhaps to angled or perpendicular parking.
Okay.
And the reason there's an ordinance is because they want you to go head in any of the angled, because the city's converting now to a mechanism that can actually view license plates, and if the car's not head in, there may not be a license plate to view. So
Okay.
not a big issue for you, just something they're considering.
Nothing on Baymart that's in the court, or?
Baymart, I've heard nothing new on Baymart since we last met.
There is a special meeting about it next Friday.
There is, it's a carryover from the meeting that they had previously.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure, again, Max Walton's representing them, so I'm not even sure what exactly is to happen.
And how about the Baymar also involves the pending ordinance?
Well, there's a question as to whether, so Max filed motions on behalf of the commissioners, motion to dismiss, saying that basically the ordinance, basically the one house per lot ordinance, should have been applied to Baymart, even though Baymart Beach Walk was a pending application. He took that position. The court, maybe I have not updated you on this. The court did not make a decision on that point. And in the decision on his motion to dismiss, the court basically said, I'm not dismissing the case, and we'd need to hear from the commissioners on this issue of whether that ordinance should have applied or should not have applied. So part of what's going on with these meetings and this upcoming meeting is the commissioners, I think, are going to choose to adopt or not adopt an ordinance that clarifies whether that one house per lot ordinance should have been applied. And then that, I don't know where it goes from there, but.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Lawyers have fun, don't they? Dom, anything?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not able to give you the empirical data that normally do on a month. I'm not in a position to provide you with the empirical data the reports that I provide you, because we had 3 days of training and we're learning a new software, and that information has not been able to be generated for this month. So if you can wait, I could get it out later in the month, or provide you with a double report.
When
for
it's
next month.
available, I actually have had a couple questions from people about projects that were authorized or not authorized. So I think when it's available, if you could get it out,
Sure.
if it's convenient. If not, I mean, if it floats.
It's usually available on the first prior to this meeting, in terms of just in general information. And then I do a second round and summarize.
Okay.
Without the specific locations. You get the specific locations and the amount. And what I do is I summarize the totals based on the type of construction.
I think we sort of, my impression is that we tend to like the spreadsheet one of all the permits.
That's easier. That's easier to get out to you.
Yeah,
once
and
it's
that's the
available.
one that's sort of
So you
major
don't
interest
need,
to
you don't
us.
need the second one.
The information on the second one is on the first one.
That's correct.
If we wanted. I think our interest generally is where are things taking place? Where are things changing?
That I could get.
And that we
that-
get from the first one.
Yeah, I could get that before this meeting.
Okay, good, if you would, when it's convenient to you.
Sure.
I guess the other thing is that Sharon's not here. I think I told you, or maybe not. I had a discussion with Sharon about updating the zoning map. Okay, had I mentioned that to you guys? No.
Well, you put it on the agenda, but we skipped over it. I
Is it on
forgot
there?
about it. Yeah, it was up there under CDP. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's
Yeah.
under CDP. All right, well, let me just tell you, I happen to be looking at the zoning map, and it's pretty clear that there are some major areas of the city that have not been updated on that particular map. The one that strikes you right away is Oak Grove. Oak Grove still has the platting, the original platting that has existed for 50 years or something, of straight-through lots. So it hasn't got the dead-end street, and it hasn't got all the distributed lots. And then there's other things, like the Truitt property that was mentioned a little while ago, where the lots were changed. There's a number of places in town. Ann keeps a record. She told me yesterday that she keeps a record of the administrative subdivisions or partitionings that have taken place that don't come to us anymore. And then there's a bunch of lots over the years that have changed orientations. The Marshall property, I think, is one of them. And then there's probably another one down by the lake. So those will need to be updated. I've asked Sharon how that's done, who does it, whether it's got to be done through a surveyor or whether it's done through IT or whatever, what information. So she's pursuing that, and it'll probably take, Ann, I think you told me, what, 5 or 6 months or something like? Yeah, it could be that. So it sort of jibes with what's going to be required for the CDP. But there's gross areas that need to be changed on the zoning map. And I don't think it's been updated since 2010 or 2009, something like that. 2009, yeah. So that's sort of in the works, and Sharon's working on that. Anything else? You got something?
Dates or, well, just, I was just looking at the agenda.
Next meeting.
So then we're not having a meeting on the 31st, is that right?
I don't think,
That is still a placeholder.
no, have we given up that placeholder on the 31st? No. I guess we need to see what we get back or how soon Debbie can give us stuff back. And we'll be in contact with her. Okay? My bet is we won't use the 31st. That's my bet. But we might need a special meeting. How about, hate to mention it, any of the, I did have a discussion with Papa John. Let me ask Don, we need to ask you a question. Did you receive any drawings?
No, no update.
Okay,
But
all right.
they are wanting to meet Wednesday.
Okay.
I mean, but nothing,
Yep.
nothing, is just basically
Yeah.
trying to address some of the zoning issues.
Yeah, I talked to Mr. Papa John, Alex, yeah, I'm sorry, Junior Papa John, several times this week. And he had told me that several days after the site plan review, that they had resubmitted or submitted a new block of drawings, which basically represented the 100-room hotel versus the 121-room hotel. And so I asked Ann whether she had the drawings. She didn't have the drawings. She in turn asked Dom. Dom didn't have the drawings. So I called him back and I sort of said, if somebody sent them, if the architect sent them, they're someplace, but we don't have them. He was very apologetic and said that they were working on a whole bunch of new things, that they would be in touch with Dom. And so that's sort of the status there. My impression is they're working on a whole bunch of ideas.
And they did, I don't know, they wanted to meet and share new information. So I believe that may be part of it.
I think it is. The way he explained it to me, there was a whole bunch of things that are somewhat different, related to the pool, related to a whole bunch of things that they're working on.
Not in their defense, but I have to say again, they've been upfront with me and they've been very good to work with.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully, I mean, they're taking seriously the zoning requirements of the site and trying to nail down what variances, if any, they're going to have to go before the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, so.
Are they likely to then come back in June?
Well, they
Don't know.
yeah, let me just comment on that. Originally, Mr. Papa John called and said, are we on or could they be put on the agenda for tonight's meeting? And we said no. That was just several days ago. And obviously, we had no way of getting information, distributing it, noticing, et cetera, et cetera. He took that very easily. He said, I understand. And so we said, if you've got new stuff, we will put you on June. So it really depends what evolves. We'll have to wait and see. The other hotel? Baltimore?
No, Baltimore, they submitted some new drawings.
Yeah.
They want to see if they're in compliance with FAR. I'm having a meeting, if they come in Monday, but my preliminary review may not be in agreement with theirs.
Okay, so we don't know anything.
We don't know. I mean, right now, everything is up in the air.
Okay, all right.
I haven't said anything about it because, unless you ask, because I don't know what to say.
I understand.
And the other state road is still in limbo.
Well, State Road is,
It's in limbo.
is State Road is, that's still, that's in court.
Yeah, that's cool.
And they have not, to my knowledge, responded at all. Okay. I looked a little more carefully at the law or the ordinances relative to State Road. And as a leasee, they had the right or would have the right to come before us. But they also, as a leasee, have to have a signature on from the owner, which they did not have. So technically, unless they could get a signature from the owner, which is perhaps unlikely since they're arguing in court, I don't envision that they'll be back talking to us soon. But you never know what's going to happen. And there's no further indication of, Mr. Papajohn didn't give me any indication of any correspondence between his cousins who own the block of property that, isn't part of the hotel. Yeah, so those discussions may be taking place behind the scenes.
That may be the new information.
There may be a whole new design, or not. Anything else?
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
When you look at the CDP, we don't have this, regardless of where Ms. Colosi goes with this mixed use, we need to start, because of this project, Papajohn project, we have to me, is the biggest mixed use development that's coming into town. And there should be some focus on development of some ordinance to address that's not only that site, but throughout the city.
And you think it's mixed use because it has commercial
Retail.
stores as part of the,
Yeah, we don't know what type of retail will come in, what intensity that retail is going to be. I don't envision the stores that are there. They who knows, they may be very upscale and not have a high demand for foot traffic.
okay. But wasn't this the same issue with, in the second block, Avenue Inn? I mean, it basically, and it never came, I don't think the question
No,
ever came up.
It didn't give rise
Yeah.
until Ms. Colosi started talking more about mixed use. And you look at it, there's only one section of the code that addresses mixed use, and that is in terms of 270-21-5B or B5.
Isn't this a little different because it's retail and hotel as opposed to retail and residential?
No, we don't make the distinction in that section because it's a mixed use, commercial and commercial and residential. But here you have, in terms of the
Here it's
code
both
doesn't address
commercial.
retail,
Right, okay, right.
does not address retail and hotel.
Okay, right. But I thought her focus was on commercial and residential, and the fact that in our code currently, residential has to follow the residential code if it's in a mixed use.
It has to follow the amount of square footage
Yes.
based on the number of floors. So 50% if you're doing two-story above the first level, and 75% of residential if you only have 2 stories. So you can max out to 75.
Okay. So that's something it needs to be addressed.
Right. But it could be something that we work forward with.
The last time, I mean, during the last CDP, when we attempted to discuss mixed use, we could not even get agreement as to what mixed use meant to different people. And much less the impact on design and code and building code, et cetera.
If I can make a recommendation, I would suggest that we look to the bigger cities that are doing with mixed use.
Where
and,
it's-
and taper it to Rehoboth.
Okay.
You may not get an agreement, but at least there's municipalities that already have ordinance in place dealing with a variety of mixed use, and see what would be applicable to us.
Okay. again, taking the lead from perfect straight man. This is something for Glenn. With all the consideration of how to deal with essentially the question that Baymart raised, okay, relative to condominiums, I do not understand our reluctance to take a look at other codes, and I would point again to the Frankfurt Code, Frankfurt, Delaware Code, which in its definition of subdivisions, okay, in 15 words, only 15 words, solved the condominium problem, okay? They basically said, and I can read it to you, they for the definition of subdivision, they go minor subdivision, major subdivision, which is essentially what we have, and then they have one more category. Any agglomeration of properties and multi-units, including condominiums, is a subdivision, in 15 words. I do not understand why we are not looking at that. It doesn't help us with Baymart.
You got to get a commissioner interested. You got to get at least one of them to raise it.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of time and effort and money that has been spent on legal fees, and I'm not denying any lawyer the right to earn fees, but in 15 words, and this is done not only in Frankfurt, Delaware, it's done around the country, other codes that I've looked at. They treat condominiums that are individual dwellings, not attached, individual dwellings, they treat them as subdivisions. All over the country. I can show you a whole bunch.
No, I'm trying to think now, though, how a development could occur that is other than attached. You know, now there's an ordinance that says you can have, it very clearly says one structure per lot. I'm not sure how you could have anything other than a subdivision to create multiple dwellings.
Well, yeah, that may clear it up, but we've argued, you know, whether that was legal or not, and it just seems to me, if you look at the Frankfurt Code, I mean, it's very clear. It sees the problem and defines the problem.
The answer.
Huh?
It defines the answer.
It defines the answer, yeah, and doesn't leave it to interpretation. And I just would urge, you know, you're the council, but I would urge the commissioners and you to look at that, okay? And it's in the definitions of subdivision in that code. I mean, there are many other things in that code that we ought to look at, that techniques and displays of charts and things that, for instance, if you are applying to do something, whether it's a subdivision, a minor subdivision, they have in a chart a list. If this is you, here are the things that you need to do, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, instead of, in our code, looking here and looking here and looking here. It's all in one chart, you know? And so we really ought to be looking at cleaning up our code with that kind of clarity, and it would eliminate a lot of the problems that applicants, and I feel for the applicants, because they don't know where to go in the code often. And then it puts the building inspector in a terrible position of interpreting in every thing, and if he misses one by accident, we're hung, you know? And it just seems to me there's a way of cleaning it up.
I think it needs to be completely revised.
Well, I think it should be revised too.
Because there's so many situations in the city where there's condominiums that could never meet subdivision code. Every townhouse, there's so many properties where there's two little houses on a lot and there's a condominium, or across from the cemetery, there's those 12 little houses. It's a condominium where they're all separate. You could never build another townhouse in town because it would have to meet subdivision code because it's a condominium. It just creates lots of problems, I think, just excluding or saying that a condominium is automatically a subdivision creates problems for a lot of things.
And Ann's reminding me that we're getting on a topic that's not even on the agenda,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I'll just read it to you. This is directly from their code. They divide definition of subdivision, the division of any tract or parcel of land into 2 or more plots, parcels, units, lots, condominiums, tracts, sites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The division or partition of land involving the opening, widening, or extension of any streets. And then finally, C, 15 words, the assemblage or consolidation of tracts, parcels, lots, or sites, re-subdivision, and condominium creation or conversion. And most of the codes around the country that I've seen distinguish between attached and not attached. In other words, they treat attached buildings differently. You know, sort of in the original concept that probably most of us have of a condominium, you know, an apartment building, even though it might be spread out if they're attached. But when they're individual ones, it's a subdivision.
Yeah, I think you'd then have to change the requirements of a subdivision.
That may be.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, everything affects something else.
So I urge you to look at that, so.
I'd like to make the Jan motion.
We have a motion, a Jan motion.
Yeah.
You're gonna get to a point that people don't know what a Jan motion is.
I want to perpetuate.
Okay, is there a second?
Remember.
We'll end